Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spookeep. We're doing a special episode today about a review for the new Nighthaunt Battle Tome. Today I'm joined by my good buddy, Night Podcaster James.
How's it going, people? I'm back.
And Night Podcaster Mergunk.
Hey guys, how's it going?
So, the Nighthaunt Battle Tome has been hotly anticipated because, putting it simply, Nighthaunt were pretty much a trash army for a very long time. At the start of second edition, they were maybe okay. If you guys remember, like the very first few weeks of second edition, they weren't bad, and then it just got worse and worse and worse as other books got updated and armies actually got battle tomes for the first time in some cases. Nighthaunt just were not looking very good. So a lot of people have been looking forward to this, and my impression is I think it's been worth the wait. Nighthaunt are a fantastic army now as a collector. As easy to paint, playing them is super satisfying. All the units have roles, whether they're good at them or not, but they each have a purpose, which is really cool. What do you guys? What are your first impressions of the book before we dive into the review?
Yeah, no, I think it's looking to be a good one right now. Curious to see what the new changes with the Next General's Handbook are going to be, and how that'll affect them. But I think overall, there's a lot of nice tools and utilities that they got at their in their toolbox now.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I'd say in terms of just overall impression of the book, they've nailed the flavor of Nighthaunt, in my opinion. And we're gonna get into the actual abilities of it, but it actually feels like a very scary the ghost army that it's supposed to, instead of just like a mirror or Stormcast with its myriad of war scrolls that sort of just all impede upon each other. So no, I quite like this new book.
Yeah, they've definitely carved out the identity of what Nighthaunt should be doing based on the fluff. Because there's always these stories of like, oh, there's a fortress town, and all of a sudden just ghosts come pouring through the walls unexpectedly. Doesn't matter how much magic stuff you have, they find a way through it. So I think in this section here, the Nighthaunt army identity, the narrative fits the gameplay, I think. So in terms of that, you've got things like spirits emerging where you least expect them, a crashing tide of terrifying ghosts charge in through walls. The most powerful weapons just pass through their ghostly forms. They wear down your defenses and wither you through sustained combat. They fly past your front lines, floating in and out of combat as they please, almost like they don't even care that you're fighting them. And individually, they're weak, but as a horde, they overwhelm you and rot you. And I think the rules really reflect that very well. That's exactly the playstyle that Nighthaunt are going to go for, and it's going to be a good book.
Yeah, agree with that.
So talking about the major changes, if you were playing in second edition, the major changes to the book. First off, many units have completely new roles. Previously, units like Spirit Hosts were damage dealers. Now they just absorb They absorb wounds for your heroes. Glaivewraith Stalkers have been changed from a do literally nothing unit into a supporting charging unit. Like there's clearly defined roles for every unit in the book instead of just having a war scroll and players figuring out maybe what it's supposed to do someday. In terms of mechanics, everything that was 6-inch move is now 8-inch. It's pretty much, I don't think there's anything in the book that's slower than 8-inch. There might be one or two, but 8-inch is pretty much the standard across the board now. Ethereal allows all of your units to retreat and charge, in addition to its previous effects. So retreating and charging is perhaps the most powerful ability in Age of Sigmar. It's up there as like one of the top 3 for sure. And having it army-wide is insane. You dictate whatever combat you want, and it gets even better when you have an army like Nighthaunt that do things on the charge. So that is just a terrifying ability to play against. A big change here is that units don't have to be in range of a hero to get the 6-up board. They just have it. There's no weird daisy chaining around heroes anymore. You still want support heroes because they have very, very useful buffs, and you're going to bring probably a bunch of them. But you don't need them for the 6-up board. Units can be self-sufficient in that respect. And building on that, there's a new command ability you can activate instead of all-out defense because Nighthaunt can't use save modifiers. So they gain this Discorporate ability, which we'll talk about in a second, but it basically gives the unit a 5-up ward, which is very strong. Very strong ability to just, anytime you want, activate a 5-up ward, get a 50% bonus in effective health.
Isn't it only a shooting phase?
Sorry?
Isn't it only when you're going up against missile attack?
I believe it's at any time.
I don't think it's any time. I think it's when you're the target of a melee or a shooting attack.
Yeah.
So it's basically their all-out defense in a sense.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It works anytime you are picked as the target of an attack in the shooting or combat phase.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So much like all-out defense, it doesn't work for hero phase shooting or out-of-phase actions, but pretty good still.
Can't use it against like charge mortal wounds, for example. Can't do it there.
Yeah, but think of it this way, like Amulet of Destiny was so good because a lot of the good hero monsters on 18 wounds were on usually when you hit them with -2 rend, they would still be on like something like a 4-up and then 5-up ward. And having that effect on like a block of 30 ghosts, 30 wounds is insane. It's insanely good.
30 wounds that are also a 4-up that ignores all rend.
Mm-hmm. Basically all the time, 4-up, 5-up. Yeah, very strong.
Mm-hmm. Another thing in the army is that hit rolls of 6 automatically pass the wound roll. So if you roll a hit roll of 6, you just go straight to saves. You skip the wound roll there. And that's every unit in the army does this. And it is a relatively high volume fire army, I'd say. Now, on the flip side, the mortal wounds that Spirit Hosts used to do have all been removed. So that's the trade-off is instead of some of your units doing mortal wounds on hit rolls of 6, now all of your units get to automatically wound on a hit roll of 6. So if you were playing a typical Night Haunt build in 2nd edition that use a lot of Grimghast Reapers, you're going to do better now because this ability is stronger than not doing anything. And the big change is Wave of Terror. Wave of Terror previously was an ability that allowed you to fight in the charge phase if you rolled a charge roll of 10 or more. But now instead, Wave of Terror is an army-defining mechanic. So let's just jump right into that because I feel like that's probably the most important thing happening in this book. So down there on the middle of the slide, Wave of Terror, you affect an enemy unit within 1 inch based on your unmodified charge roll. So you finish a charge roll, you look at your charge, you look at the table, and based on what you rolled, and this is with no bonuses included, so just based on your roll, you get to pick one of these effects based on your roll. If you rolled high, you can pick one of the lower ones. So for example, if you rolled a 4 to 7, you can pick Shriek, which is the enemy unit has -1 to hit. If you rolled an 8 or higher, you get Stun, which is an enemy unit has -1 to save rolls, which is crazy. You just give all of your guys +1 rend. That's an incredibly strong ability. And then Petrify, if you rolled a 10+, the enemy just has Strike Last. So that is
insanely strong too.
Very strong. And the best part is if you roll like a 10 or 11 or 12, you can just pick Stun instead. Like if you don't want to have the enemy Strike Last, like if you know there's only going to be one combat each way, it's fine. You can just have another -1 to save. And it specifically says in the rules that these effects stack. So unless they put out an errata saying otherwise, you can have any number of -1 to save roll effects. Obviously, an enemy can only strike last once, and you can only have a maximum -1 to hit, but you could, for example, debuff an enemy with -1 hit, and then debuff them again in case they gain all-out attack. But the big one, obviously, is stun. The more stunning charges you have, the better your units are going to look, and the whole army has been designed with this in mind, because you're pretty much not going to see high rend values anywhere because of that. Most things are rend 1 or rend 0. I don't know if there's even a source of rend 2 in the book. Off the top of my head, I can't remember one.
Kurdoss.
Yeah, okay. There's a couple, but in general, it's Rend 0 and Rend 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, the units are mostly Rend 1. It's only the heroes, some of them, that are Rend 2 or Rend 3.
Yeah. So looking at some other battle traits here for the Night Haunt, completely reworked Aura of Dread. Enemy units within 3 inches are terrified. Previously, this was a -1 bravery effect. Now it's a status, because there are abilities that will work on if enemies are terrified, which I think is really cool. But just by itself, if an enemy is terrified, then it cannot receive or issue Inspiring Presence, which is huge. And the more we go into 3rd edition, the huger this will be, because it seems like they're just getting rid of Battleshock immunity aside from Inspiring Presence, based on our initial previews of the Skaven Battle Tomes and other books. Yeah, Battleshock actually matters now, and Night Haunt just say, no, you don't get to use the ability that counters Battleshock, which is crazy good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even with the Daughters of Cain getting rid of Battleshock immunity with Hagbrew, people are going to have to either rely on heroes that provide an aura of Battleshock immunity. So like heroes like, I mean, Stormcast generally don't struggle too much with that, but like Andrasta, for instance, for big blocks of Redeemers. and others prayers like Daughters of Cain have Sacrament to Blood or something. Those are actually going to be used now because Battleshock Immunity is going out the window.
And it's usually the armies that actually care about Battleshock that are going to be struggling with it. So, for example, Nighthaunt, they are Bravery 10, but if you're bringing a block of 30 guys and you lose 15, that's going to suck if you can't use Inspiring Presence.
Oh, yeah.
So another key ability here is Ethereal. That's the ability that gives you a 6-up ward. It also lets you ignore all modifiers to save rolls, positive or negative. So you can't get any bonuses to save, but at the same time, you ignore the rend of your opponent's weapons. Or if they have a spell that reduces your save rolls, that doesn't affect you. This is also the ability that gives you access to retreat and charge army-wide, which is crazy good. So
one difference here between now and prior is the fact that Ethereal is now an Allegiance ability, whereas Ethereal was once a War Scroll ability, right?
That's right, yeah. All of these abilities only work if you are playing Nighthaunt Allegiance. If you bring these units in as allies, you do not get access to them. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the introduction, but Discorporate. Okay. It's a command ability. It's your replacement for all-out defense, essentially. You can activate it when you're attacked in the shooting or combat phases, and you gain a 5-up ward for the rest of that phase. This works just like a regular command ability. It can be issued in the same way as a normal one and received in the same way as a normal one. We also mentioned during the intro that there is a new Frightful Touch ability. Any hit roll of 6, either melee or ranged, because Nighthaunt do actually have some missile weapons, and any hit roll of 6 automatically wounds, which is a nice little accuracy boost. And the final reworked ability for Nighthaunt is that they changed how the Deep Strike mechanic works. So previously Nighthaunt were identical to Stormcast in that they could set up half of their units in reserve and then just deploy them on the table. Now it's actually changed. I would argue it's stronger now, but what it does is after setup, you can remove 3 of your units and put them in reserve, and then at any of your movement phases, deploy them as if they were coming in from reserve. And the additional flexibility of picking which units you want to set up after the game starts, so you can mess with your opponent, so you can deny space, you can do all kinds of things. Like if there's a battle plan where you score only if the enemy held an objective, then you can put a unit on an objective. Your opponent can think, oh, okay, I'm going to put this unit over here to contest it. You just pull your unit off so that technically nobody controls it on the first turn. And like little things like that get enabled because of an ability like Vanishing Phantasms. It's very powerful.
That is true.
It is limited to 3 units, and given the way this could become a serious limitation, and it's something you have to work on. You have to think, okay, which 3 units do I want to put in reserve? When do I want them to come out? Where do I want them to come out? There's a lot of tactical play that comes in with this ability.
Right. But we also have to consider, like, previously this used to be like Stormcast, right? Where you could just deploy half units. But Nighthaunt have actual Allegiance abilities now, so maybe they decided to make it slightly worse than Stormcast to differentiate the two.
Yeah, it is. It makes Stormcast look better, that's for sure.
In regards to movement, yeah. In regards to deployment and movement, absolutely.
And it fits the theme of Nighthaunt better, being about, unexpected attacks, angles that you weren't. It's not going to be just two pitched armies across a battlefield. The Nighthaunt are going to play the game their way, and you have to react to it accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Section 1, War Scrolls. This is the Stormkeep ranking system we've used in the past. S tier means that it is a very high impact ability. It's a unique aspect that nothing else in the book can bring, and it absolutely defines a list, and that list is probably going to be good because of this particular ability or War Scroll. That scales all the way down in terms of how strong and versatile they are, all the way down to F tier, which is something that is too niche and just never worth using. We typically don't put things in F tier. We try to find some redeeming quality. And in that case, we'll stick something in D tier. If, for example, if we think, well, I'd use it, but it just costs too many points, right? Like a good example of this is a Knight Relictor in the Stormcast book as opposed to a Lord Relictor. There's a 5-point difference between the models, and one of them gets +1 to chant. It's obvious you're going to use the Lord Relictor, but if someday they reduce the Knight Relictor's cost, then you could see him in list. So that's kind of like a D tier model. Is just, it's not good, but maybe someday it could be. Starting off with the basic battle line unit that defines the army, I think, in terms of appearance. This is like the iconic Nighthaunt model, always has been since Soul Wars. Coming into 3rd edition, Chainrasps have actually lost bravery, but they don't require a bannerman anymore, which is, before there were some abilities that could snipe out your bannerman. Bravery 8 on a death unit just feels weird. I think this might be the only one. The champion has +1 attack instead of giving the unit 10 bravery. Chilling Horde has been changed from re-rolling a wound roll of 1 to adding 1 to wound rolls. That's pretty much standard across the board in Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. Anytime you have an ability that would allow you to re-roll or gain something like that, it's been changed to just add 1 to the roll instead. And Chilling Horde also activates on charging, and not just from having a lot of models in the unit. So the size of the unit no longer impacts the power of it, aside from just adding more models, which is an interesting change in design. So looking at the pros of Chainrasp, they're always battle line, and they are the cheapest battle line, always, and they have the summonable keyword, which will matter for some things in this book. They're only 110 points, they have 1-inch attack, but they have 25 mil bases, so perfect. You can fit 2 ranks of them in combat. And they are a cheap screen that can absorb charges and hold objectives. And that's pretty much the list of things that they're good at. It's just getting in the way with 10 bodies. Because their offensive profile is terrible. On 4s and 4s with no rend and 1 damage. You can buff them up with +1/+1 and Wave of Terror, but why bother, right? Like, there's just better units that you can put offensive buffs on. And same with their defense. They've only got a 5-up ethereal save, while the rest of the book, I think, is a 4-up ethereal. Mm-hmm. And it's just, why would you waste any time buffing these guys? And then their bravery isn't very good either, which is shocking. So, what do you guys think about the Chainrasp?
It's like a very cheap tar pit unit, and it's good for screening your more valuable units from melee. I mean, we'll discuss why melee alphas don't work against this army, but if you did want to screen, this is cheap. I mean, it's kind of durable, 5-up ethereal, and you can pop Discorporate on it. It's also good for if you want to really stack Wave of Terror with like min squads, and it's like, I think they're on 25mm bases, so it's one of the few units in Nighthaunt that can actually fight in 2 ranks. So that's what it's got going for it.
Yeah, they're cheap. They fill a battle line slot, which isn't as relevant in this army as it would be in some other armies. Some other armies really struggle filling those battle line slots. This one is tons, so being battle line is not a big deal. But 10 models, they cover a certain amount of space. They can give you a Wave of Terror roll, and that's it. They get in the way of things that would kill your other units that are more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
They can they're a disposable unit. They're like Liberators, but
2.0 Liberators, I'd say.
Yeah, they're like 2.0 Liberators. But unlike Liberators in a Stormcast army, where Stormcasts have very few choices for that role, nothing really is disposable in Stormcast in the way that Chainrasp are. Liberators fill that role for Stormcast very well. Everything else just is too useful. So C tier for Chainrasp. I think that's an appropriate ranking.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Looking at Grimghast Reapers, these guys were, I'd say, the cornerstone of all Nighthaunt lists in the previous edition, and they pretty much still are. They're still very, very strong. Their Reap-like Corn ability used to give them rerollable hits if you were fighting a unit with 5 or more models. Now it gives them +1 attack. So arguably better.
Arguably better. Especially if you're going to use all-out attack when these guys are used like a Chainghasts or whatever near them.
Yeah, the Death Knell is simplified. It doesn't have this weird, roll after dealing damage thing. Now instead it's just a D3 damage upgrade. So instead of 2 attacks on 3s and 3s with 1 damage, the guy with the Death Knell is 2 attacks on 3s and 3s, D3 damage. So it's just straight up a damage increase for the leader of the unit. Grimghast Reapers are always battle line. They also are summonable. They are a 2-inch reach on 32mm bases, which makes them just the generic good unit to use in this army, because a lot of other units in this army are on the same base size with 1-inch reach, and that makes it very difficult to fit every model that you want into combat. So these guys are a great target for offensive buffs. Because of their reach, they can get almost every model into combat fairly reliably, and you can give them +1 hit, +1 to wound, bonuses to their rend indirectly through Wave of Terror, so they can actually turn into a really scary fighting unit. Defensively, they're squads of 10, which means you can double reinforce them since they're battle line, and have a squad of 30. And then you can stack all kinds of defensive buffs on them, like the 5-up ward. You can stack Shade Mist, which gives them -1 to be wounded. These guys are a great tar pit, in addition to being a really good hammer unit. They're also a really good anvil. They also have 3 attacks each if they're fighting a unit with 5 or more models, all the time, not just when you're charging, which some other models in this book only get good when they charge. These guys don't. They fight the same no matter what you're doing, which is a very useful thing in Age of Sigmar, because sometimes you are on the back foot, getting double turned, playing defensively, and fighting back as the best you can. Now, the downsides, 32 mil bases, you can fit them in range in a perfect scenario, but sometimes terrain and stuff gets in the way, and being on a larger base still kind of is annoying, especially if you have a squad of 30. Being on a 32 mil base with a squad of 30 guys is a large footprint, and it can make it difficult to get where you need to be. Their damage, outside of getting buffs like +1 hit, +1 wound, and Wave of Terror, their damage really isn't that scary, considering they're one of the primary hammer units in this army. Unless they get those buffs, they're really not a threat. You can almost ignore them. Like a lot of armies will just laugh at, let's say, 20 attacks on 2s and 2s, Rend 1. It's not that scary.
No, I mean, it's the Rend mostly, I think, that's holding them back. But so if they really get off of Wheel of Terror, that helps, yeah.
Yeah, if you have some supporting Chainrasps or Glaivewraith Stalkers or Spirit Hosts charge in alongside with them, and you get that 8-up roll, and you can effectively make all of these guys Rend 2, all of a sudden they go from this laughable damage into, oh, my unit's getting wiped out. Okay, I see what's happening.
Yeah.
And a last thing to mention is that these guys their peak damage is when they're fighting stuff with 5 or more models. Some armies just aren't doing that. They're using stuff like units of 2 in Nurgle, and then reinforcing it, and you get to 4. Or, for example, Fulminators in Stormcast are a unit of 4. You might be fighting units of 3 very often, or Gargants. Just you'll never get the bonus damage against some of these armies. So that is important to note. Overall, though, these guys do everything that you want Nighthaunt to do. They're durable. They fight in 2 ranks, which nothing else in the book does. So they're arguably the best target for offensive buffs, and defensively, they're fantastic. 4-up Ethereal, 30 wounds, and a squad of 30 with a 5-up board. Really, really hard to shift that. So S tier all the way. These guys will be the cornerstone of 3rd edition lists like they were in 2nd edition. Looking at Hexwraiths, in 3rd edition, they have +1 hit, and their mounts are more accurate now. They wound on 4s instead of 5s. They no longer deal any mortal wounds on hit rolls of 6 like they used to, and they no longer deal mortal wounds when they pass over units, which was a very unnecessarily complex mechanic in terms of how the rules translated into how it functioned. But
I mean, they gave it to Blood Knights basically, but
pretty much.
They could have just, yeah.
But what the Hexwraiths have gotten in return is very, very useful. So they're always battle line. They're the same point cost as Grimghast Reapers per squad, 160. And they are very fast. Everything else in the army is 8-inch movement pretty much. These guys are a 12-inch flying move, which doesn't seem like it's that much more, but 12-inch over 8-inch is a big deal. And most importantly, they have an ability that can double their flying move for that turn. They can't charge, which means they're not going to contribute to Wave of Terror combats. But the fact that you can just pick this unit and say, I'm going to fly 24 inches any direction I want, is incredibly valuable for stealing objectives late game, for zoning off particular parts of the board that you need to make sure nobody drops in units from reserve. Very useful ability.
For pin as well, if you're trying to alpha with these guys, you can pin your enemy in their territory there if you use them to screen out.
Absolutely. If their army's not flying, you can just drop a bunch of Hexwraiths in front of them, and they have to cut their way through. And that is a very useful thing, because Nighthaunt want to be having defensive combats. They're a very durable, resilient army that's meant to wear you down. So if they willingly charge your Hexwraiths and fight them for 2 turns, you're looking pretty good.
Or 2 wounds apiece with these guys, too.
That's right.
That's correct. So this unit is currently being used a lot in the old people who are still playing with the old book. And it's pretty good, because 2 wounds on a 4-up, and then now they're getting a 5-up ward to help, and plus mortal wounds constantly on the charge for an entire army that retreats and charges, by the way, every turn. This is really good. It's going to do consistent mortal wounds pretty much every turn that it stays alive.
Yeah, this is very much a 5-man unit that is just charging every single turn, retreating and charging, doing some light mortal wounds. Mortal wounds is definitely something this army lacks in general. They don't have a single unit that can just dump out a bunch of mortal wounds like Stormcast can, or even Nurgle with their diseases. They can put up a bunch of mortal wounds. That's not really something Nighthaunt can do. And having Hexwraiths come in and do a little D3 mortal on the side is a very useful thing. And if it procs Wave of Terror, even better, right? So not in addition to immediately doing D3 mortal wounds, they can also stack up a -1 save debuff. And with their 12-inch move, that lets them get into positions that other units that are only 8-inch move wouldn't be able to. They also have a smaller footprint than a lot of other units in terms of horizontal distance. A lot of other Nighthaunt units actually cover quite a bit of space on 32 mil bases. Even if you're going 5 wide, it still covers quite a bit of distance. These guys can be a lot tighter in their formation because they're only 5 models. But there's a lot of downsides to this unit. It's not a good offensive hammer, right? It has 1-inch attacks on 65 mil bases, so you can't really fight reinforced, which means it's not worth giving offensive buffs to these guys. Their damage for their cost is also not very good if you look at their stats compared to Grimghast Reapers or one of the next models coming up, the Bladegheist Revenants. They're just not the offensive hammer unit that's going to win you the game. They are very much a utility piece meant for supporting charges and capturing objectives and pinning opponents more than anything else. So for those reasons, I think B tier is appropriate. They're a nice unit to pepper into lists here and there. I don't think you form an entire list around them.
No, I don't think you do. Yeah.
They remind me very much of Prosecutors from Stormcast, but with a lot more value, I'd say. Prosecutors have the one thing that they're good at, which is absorbing Unleash Hell and standing on an objective that's open. These guys do that, but also contribute some mortal wounds and Wave of Terror. So a lot more useful than Stormcast Prosecutors. And here's the other S tier unit, I think, at least in my estimation. Bladegheist Revenants are spectacular in 3rd edition. They lost their rerollable hits while they're near a Spirit Torment or Chainghast, but that's fine because they get +1 attack on the charge, and they're always charging thanks to Ethereal letting them retreat and charge. They become Battle Line in Scarlet Doom, which is one of the sub-factions we'll get to, and when they are in Scarlet Doom, they gain a whole bunch of mortal wounds on the charge. So after you finish a charge with this unit, you roll a number of dice equal to the models in that unit. So if you had 10 models, you roll 10 dice, and for each 5 up, you deal a mortal wound to your target immediately, which on a unit of 10, you're going to do about 3 mortal wounds, which is already better than Hexwraiths. If you think about Hexwraiths, on a 2-up, they deal D3. These guys are doing that every single time, and that scales up with unit size. If you bring 20 Bladegheist in it, you'll do an average of 6 mortal wounds. And if you bring 30 Bladegheist, you're going to do an average of about 10 mortal wounds every turn whenever you charge with these guys. It's crazy.
Yeah, this we were discussing how good Bladegheist are, and I think later on we'll discuss some builds, but this unit is going to be a staple in a lot of armies. This is like, remember when the Stormcast book came out and everyone was like, oh yeah, dragons are going to see play. This is going to see play. A lot of play. It's a really good unit.
Yeah, they don't feel overpowered either. They feel very limited in what they can do, but they're very strong in terms of what your army's trying to do. These guys fill a lot of gaps in the Nighthaunt army. They're very much like Grimghast Reapers, 32 mil bases, 10 models, a little bit more expensive. They cost about 10% more, 175 points instead of 160. The big weakness of these guys, obviously, is that they have 1-inch reach. Unlike Reapers, which have a 2-inch reach, these guys are fighting in 1 rank. So you might be thinking it's very tempting to go like big blocks of 30 so that you can get all the mortal wounds with the Scarlet Doom ability. But then you're only fighting with 7 guys, let's say best case scenario, because of their 1-inch range. And yeah, that sucks. That really sucks. Now they do get +1 attack on the charge, while Grimghast Reapers get it if they're fighting 5 or more models. So in all the situations Grimghast Reapers are not getting the bonus, these guys get it every single turn as long as you're charging, right? Defensively, they won't get it, which is that's where Grimghast can shine, is fighting defensively against hordes. But these guys are against Gargants, against Fulminators, against any unit with 3 models or 1 model. These guys are looking a lot better than Grimghast Reapers.
Agree.
Like Grimghast Reapers, though, they also have the same problem of only Rend 1. You need Wave of Terror in order to deal any meaningful damage. And these guys on their own, they could get the Wave of Terror if they roll an 8 up to charge, but that's not very reliable. So it's recommended that you bring a couple of supporting charging units so that you get a couple more rolls, and so that one of them at least can be an 8+, and then you can get the bonus Rend. And then suddenly these guys are 3 attacks apiece, 2s and 2s, Rend 2. That's really scary damage profile for a battle line unit that also does mortal wounds on the charge if you're playing the right subfaction. Crazy. Just crazy.
This one's like a really good unit. I don't know if people actually collected or played these in the past, but it's like one of those, the old adage of, hey, something that wasn't seeing a lot of play and now will suddenly see a lot more play. It's like that Heartguard Berserker and Volkite Berserker switch.
They put them into Arena of Shades, so...
Oh, that's true. Yeah, they are good in Arena of Shades.
So rounding out the 3 hammers in this book, I'd say Dreadscythe Harridans are currently the worst of the bunch. They're not bad by any means, though. So let's take a look at them. Changes in 3rd edition. And now I'm comparing this to the War Scroll we found in Broken Realms Bellicor, because that would be the one most players have been using the most recently. So they gain +1 attack all the time. So they're 4 attacks apiece, but they lost the Exploding Hit 6 effect. I'd say 1 attack all the time is probably better than 1 attack sometimes when you roll a hit roll of 6. And their profile changed. They're only on 4s and 4s with no Rend instead of 4s and 3s with Rend 1, so that's just a strict downgrade. However, their Harrowing Shriek now reduces wound rolls instead of hit rolls. So when you charge an enemy, that enemy has -1 to wound, which is a very powerful ability. A lot of people are using all-out attack, and that gives you a bonus to hit, but there are no such bonuses to wound rolls. So any modifiers on wound rolls are a lot more powerful than hit rolls.
I agree. Like, it makes them very good defensively. They could also be used in conjunction, like a min squad of 10, just in conjunction with some other unit to make it even more tankier, like by essentially making your opponents less useful. My only issue is investing in Harridans means playing either a completely different subfaction or essentially realizing that your offensive output isn't going to be that high, which sucks. Like, it's weird.
Harridans
it's like it's
issues.
A support unit. Yeah, it's like you can't build into Harridans because, like, if you're going to build units that don't have 2-inch reach, that can't fight in 2 ranks on 32, you may as well be using Bladegheist and doing a bunch of mortal wounds. But at the same time, using these units as a way to debuff enemy units on the charge and then maybe use these as horde killers in min squads isn't the worst idea ever. So they're in a weird place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's go over the pros here real quick because we're talking negatively about them, but they have a lot of good stuff. They are battle line in Quicksilver Dead, and if they are in Quicksilver Dead, then they also ignore ward rolls, which is either the best ability in the game or completely useless and does nothing.
Yep.
They have +1/+1 if they're within 6 inches of any units that are wounded or have any slain models. So if you ping off some mortal wounds with a hero face spell or with some shooting, then these guys automatically become 3s and 3s, and you don't need to give them all-out attack. You don't have to give them any bonuses to wound rolls like with the Guardian of Souls. They're kind of independent fighters. They don't need all the stuff that the other units would need. They are a high-volume attacker. They're always 4 attacks apiece, right? Which is good if you're just trying to dump out as much damage as possible. These guys technically have a higher max damage than Bladegheist or Grimghast Reapers. And, they have that ability we mentioned where enemy units within 3 inches have -1 to wound, which is, again, there's a spell that gives you the same effect. It's called Shade Mist. It gives a unit -1 to be wounded. But that's a spell. It's not reliable. You can't always have it. These guys are like a secondary source of it, and it activates anytime they charge. So they're a really good supporting charging unit. The problems start to come in when you compare them to other units that are the same points and the same model size, like the same footprint. So 10 models on 32 mil bases. They're also 1-inch reach like Bladegheist, so they're not going to be fighting in 2 ranks, which makes them, it really caps out their damage in terms of their max potential damage. They are 10 wounds for 160 points, just like Grimghast and Bladegheist are a little more expensive, but pretty much the same range. So you're competing with those 2 units, and you're not really filling a niche that either of those 2 aren't doing better, right? If you try to make them your primary hammer unit, they have no rend at all, which means you need even more Wave of Terror support for these guys to do meaningful damage. I mean, but when you get it though, 4 attacks per model on 3s and 3s, Ren 2 or Ren 3 is really nuts. It's a lot
Yeah, pretty
scarier than 2
baller.
attacks per model, that's for sure.
Yeah, that profile's pretty baller.
Yeah.
I will say.
Now, I'm a big fan of consistency. Maybe I'm biased because I play Stormcast. I like seeing 2s and 2s, so when I see that the best this unit can do is 3s and 3s, that kind of sucks. I get that it all averages out, but I like consistency in the end. And
well, think about it this way, right? Like the Stormcast units that are all capable of getting 2s and 2s, all are above 200 points. For 160 point battle line unit, yeah, sure, 3s and 3s, why not?
Yeah. I'm just having trouble fitting them into lists, especially because they have to hurt a unit in order to get that +1/+1, and they themselves can't do that. So they require something like some kind of spell hitting somebody, like an endless spell going off, which very easy to do with this army, mind you. Some shooting. Yeah, just you need a little bit more setup, whereas the other, like if you're getting charged and you don't really have access to a good Unleash Hell, these guys won't have the +1/+1 that turn. There's just a lot of downsides to using Harridans that the other hammer units don't have to deal with, but I think that -1 wound roll thing that's really good. I think that's what keeps them as a viable hammer unit. And if you want to invest heavily in them in Quicksilver Dead, and you face off against Daughters of Cain and they have their 5 board rolling, and you just ignore it and laugh at them, that'll be the best day of your life. So they're not bad by any means. There's nothing objectively bad with Dreadscythe Harridans. I think they're just outclassed by the Reapers and the Revenants. I think they're just a little bit worse. It feels like if Stormcast Dracolines, they're not. There's nothing wrong with them. There's better choices in the book.
Yeah, especially for the points. Yeah.
Yeah, if these guys were a little bit cheaper, 140, I would definitely consider them a lot more. Looking at Glaivewraith Stalkers, this has to be the most improved unit because previously it did nothing. Like I think it actually just did nothing. Nobody ever used them. They saw more play in Warhammer Underworlds than they did in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, which is sad. Big glow up here. They're still not spectacular or anything, but they actually have a thing that they do that nothing else in the army can do. So let's go over that. So their damage is, they have 1 less attack, but they have +1 damage and +1 rend. So overall, they're doing more damage than they were before. Their reach was reduced, which is okay. I don't think it matters because you're never going to run more than 4 of these guys, so the reach doesn't really matter. They are summonable, so if you have abilities that interact with that. But here's the main things that make them good, is they have +1 to charge all the time because of the drummer. And then they have another ability called the Point of Death, where you pick a prey unit on the table, and anytime you make a normal move closer to that prey unit, you get another +3 to charge. So you have a unit here that could by itself get +4 to charge rolls on an 8-inch move, which allows them the kind of mobility that nothing else in the book has, because it's all 8-inch move. Nothing in here has like run and charge. There's no other charge bonuses. The only other fast unit I'd say would be the Hexwraiths. But the Hexwraiths still don't get charge bonuses. They just get a movement bonus, right? Which is not always as useful, because one thing Nighthaunt really want to do is land every charge. Like every failed charge is a big deal for Nighthaunt. It really sucks. So a +4, making them a very consistent charger, is a very useful thing. Now, that ability, the Point of Death, only works when you make a normal move. So these guys aren't very good if you're retreating and then charging back to combat. They'll only have the +1 to charge. However, in that situation, you're probably going to have a 3-inch charge anyway. So they just can't fail that charge because of the drummer. So these guys are basically just a little small footprint supporting charging unit for Wave of Terror. Mergonk, I know you really like having small footprint units come out of reserve. I think these guys are pretty useful for that purpose too, just sneaking them on to a point where your opponent left just enough room for you to steal the objective or take some key space. Very tiny footprint is useful for that.
Yeah, I really like the +3 to charge rolls. Like, if you're not careful with your positioning, they can just like prey on one of your heroes, but really help out Wave of Terror synergy against whatever they're trying to charge into a unit. It's pretty good.
And another thing, we're talking about charging for Wave of Terror, but another reason to charge is to inflict the Terrify status on enemies, because there's a lot of effects in this book that work off enemies being terrified. And I'd say the number one would be the Krulghast Cruciator. His ability only works if the enemy is terrified. So having a unit that can reliably make a charge can really help shore up some of the randomness out of this army.
Yeah.
Now, of course, they got a lot going against them. They're never battle line. They can't double reinforce them. They can't score objectives that require battle line. Their ability, Point of Death, stops working once the prey unit that they pick is slain. So you might just want to pay attention to which one you pick. There's actually no bonus to picking a prey unit that you want to kill. So just pick something that your opponent wants you to not, something you're not going to kill. That way you can keep moving towards it and keep getting the bonus to charge. They have to be deployed on the table in order to make the prey ability work. So you can't actually deploy them out of reserve. You can teleport them and do some sneaky stuff there. But if you want to make use of the Point of Death, you have to put them on the table. They're only 4 wounds for 105 points. Really
that
bad.
Sounds about right.
They're one wounded. They're 1 wounded model. I've got the book in front of me.
Oh boy. See, I thought maybe I made a mistake and they were 2 wounds apiece.
No.
Oh boy. And their damage is pretty much nothing. So really the only reason for this unit to exist is to add another stack of Wave of Terror, to spread Terrify, to maybe use their tiny footprint in neat little strategic ways that other units can't. C tier, I think. They're not great, but they have a very specific niche, and it's a somewhat useful niche too.
It's my favorite models in Nighthaunt, though.
Oh, they're so cool. I love using them in Underworlds, man.
Spirit Hosts. Pretty much major glow up. I mean, Nighthaunt had a pretty good White Dwarf update where Spirit Hosts could take, just in that subfaction, they could take wounds for Nighthaunt heroes. But they lost that, but they're permanent bodyguard status for Nighthaunt. They're really cheap, and they're battle line, which is insane. It's like, imagine having Stormcast Praetors for battle line. And they're actually really, really important because Nighthaunt have always been an army, and maybe this applies to Death in general, that has always relied on synergies with their heroes, whether they be spells or abilities or auras, in order to fully function and be an effective army. And if you snipe those heroes either with spells or ranged projection, suddenly the army just falls apart. So having this as a mechanic, so 3 wound models that can protect your heroes very reliably, in addition to your hero's ethereal save, and is excellent. It really, really helps them survive longer into the mid game and late game. They don't have Rend. They're pretty inaccurate. They're not meant to fight. I mean, Praetors can actually put up a pretty decent fight with their halberds. These guys aren't meant for fighting. They're purely a bullet sponge.
Right, and I can't stress how important it is for Nighthaunt to have support heroes that survive past round 1 and 2. You really want those auras every single turn. This is very much a force multiplier army. You don't want your heroes getting picked off by small amounts of damage. If your opponent, you can even reinforce this unit and then effectively add 18 wounds to all the heroes around you. Mergonk, I don't think you mentioned this, but their Drawn to War ability, it's not just like Praetors where you bond to a single hero. This ability works on every hero within range. Anytime they take damage. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So you
kind of work like a Immortus Guard up in OBR.
Yeah, you can have all of your support heroes in a little cluster, and these guys stretched out, and they can protect all of them at the same time. Very powerful ability.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not damage dealers, they're not cheap screens like Chainrasps, they're not charge supporting units because you want them sitting back with your heroes. They are just there to give your heroes more wounds, and that is an invaluable role in this army because if you didn't have these guys protecting your heroes, they're all gone by the bottom of round 2, and you're not looking very good.
Mm-hmm. Armies like Tzeentch and Longstrike Raptors or Lumineth would have just torn this army apart without this unit.
Yeah, it gives them a lot of good matchups, this unit alone.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely see at least one in every list, and the fact that it's battle line makes constructing this so much easier.
This is honestly, I mean, I know this is not like this is not a damage dealer, but this is borderline A. Like, if we're ranking it B because it's situational, obviously, but it's at the high level of B. Like, you're gonna see at least one in every list, like Paul said.
Yeah, sometimes they'll be reinforced, sometimes you'll see 2 of them, but I think every list will have at least one of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's take a look at the first new unit in the book, the Craventhrone Guard. So they've got don't spoil it. They've got some interesting things about them. So their battle line, if you have Kurdoss Valentian in your army, for any reason, he's just in the army, boom, these guys are battle line. And they're 115 points for 5. They have a shooting weapon, which is a weird thing to say as a pro, but unlike most other units in the Nighthaunt army, they can use Unleash Hell, and they can tear down screens before your other units charge into melee. And that's a big problem that melee-heavy armies like Nighthaunt have, where your
That's a problem Death has.
Death in general has
Death
this problem, yeah.
Yeah, Death doesn't have shooting outside of the OBR catapult and this thing.
Yep. Or any ranged power projection in general, right? That's a struggle for Death armies. These guys also ignore cover, and they ignore line of sight when you're shooting, which is going to be very interesting against the Sylvaneth when they get a new book soon. They can be deployed directly into range with the Vanishing Phantasms ability. They only shoot 12 inches, but when you can just deep strike them into range, it's not that much of a concern. They're one of the things that can enable Dreadscythe Harridans, right? After they shoot, they can also charge in for Wave of Terror, so that's a nice little supporting thing there. We'll talk about the Black Coach later, but they can also help stack up the Black Coach's effect because they shoot, and then the Black Coach has a shooting weapon as well. Well, ability, but whatever. And they rally back on a 5-up instead of a 6-up. So for, you get 3 squads of these guys for 345 points. That's not a huge chunk of your army. It leaves you a lot of space to do a lot of things. That's like bringing 2 squads of Grimghast Reapers for 15 of these guys. And I'll let you cover the cons because I'm really trying to make this unit work.
The cons are just okay. So Nighthaunt do have deep strike. They have 8-inch movement. So the 12-inch range, while really really bad for a shooting unit, and 2 attacks is fine. Like Nighthaunt have ways to like get around that. The problem is 4s and 4s, -1 rend, 1 damage. No auto wounds because Nighthaunt's auto wound thing only works on melee weapons. And no mortal wounds. So I'm not into, and there's really no buffs for shooting either in this book. I think every single buff, the +1 to hit and +1 to wound that you see with the Chainghasts and other heroes, we'll see it later, they only apply to melee weapons, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
So literally, the only way to buff this is with all-out attack, so which means you're going to be shooting 2 attacks, 3s and 4s, -1, 1. Now, it does ignore cover, but how is that ever really relevant in Age of Sigmar? Like, we're not... Like, even if you play with huge amounts of terrain, like, your unit would have to be wholly within for it to do anything.
Oh.
And all-out defense exists as, like, a pseudo-cover mechanic anyway.
Sorry, I just double-checked. Frightful Touch works on anything. I thought it was just melee, but it does work on shooting as well.
Oh, okay. So Frightful Touch does make it somewhat better then, because it means, like, you can try sniping a screen or, like, a valuable unit.
But a problem is that these guys require a command point in order to use all-out attack, and... spoiler, this army doesn't generate any extra command points, and it really wants to use every single one. There's a lot of...
Yeah, I mean, I guess that in that sense, like, I should mention this. I mean, we'll get to Kurdoss Valentian. But if you are taking Kurdoss Valentian to make these guys battle line, then Kurdoss does have a mechanic where he tries to steal a command point from your enemy on a 5-up. So I guess that gives you the extra CP you need.
I still wouldn't want to use it on these guys.
Right. I'm just like, I'm trying to explain something really bad. I'm not like, it doesn't mean it's great. According to the math, to a 3-up and 4-up save, which is like the most common save you see in Age of Sigmar, they only do about like 4 damage. Which is kind of terrible if you think about it.
Yeah, you would need 3 squads of these guys to kill a unit of Liberators, assuming they don't use all-out defense.
Yeah, and the fact that they're 12 inches away means when your opponent inevitably riposts into them, they will die. So I'm not sure what these are meant to do. The only thing I can see is maybe like if you were using these to power up a Black Coach, maybe if you were just like holding down these guys basically outflank and like shoot sort of like Dragoons. I'm using like old military examples where like your main battle line of Grimghasts, tie someone down and these guys keep unloading into them without risk of being hit back. But no, the profile just isn't worth it in my opinion. 3s and 4s, -1 rend. Just there's way too many armies that can like get around that.
And it's not even a points issue, really, right? Like these guys could be 80 points per 5, and you'd see a lot of them. But that's not... Nighthaunt are they're a horde army, but they're kind of an elite horde army, if that makes any sense, right? Like they're not... They don't have just tons and tons of zombies or skeletons like Soulblight does. Their dudes are better than that. So the only way to make these guys worthwhile would be to make them super cheap. Because you just need a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, their War Scroll didn't really change, but they were 95 points in the original box, and they went up 20 points. I'm not sure why. Now, if Age of Sigmar becomes really terrain heavy, and if Sylvaneth becomes a problem where you just can't see Sylvaneth for shooting, I guess these guys are great in that because You can essentially risk-free attack someone, not needing line of sight, right? So,
there's a few nice things, but the damage they do is so low, they're just disappointing. It really is disappointing.
Yeah, I don't know what these are for. Maybe just for pure volume, but even to like a 5-up save, they only do about 6 damage, maybe 7 damage in a unit of 10.
Yeah, they're not even high volume shooters. They're 10 or 11 shots for 115 points. Really bad on their accuracy.
I don't know. Maybe someone will make a build and we'll see some play. But yeah, right now I rank them pretty low, considering what else is in the book. Like, if the book was the old Nighthaunt book, could probably have used these guys maybe, but the new one just doesn't need them. They've just got so much better things going on for the points.
Yeah, if you're in range to shoot with them, you're also in range to charge. And if you're in range to charge, you might as well be using a real unit like Bladegheist Revenants or Grimghast Reapers, or even Chainrasps, frankly. I'd rather have Chainrasp in my army than these guys.
So. Yeah, that is the other thing we didn't mention. Yeah, if you're ever using Chainrasp and you want to use these guys as screens for like 5 points more, or no, I guess at the same cost. Yeah, sure. I guess you could do that. It's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, if you have all your battle line slots filled, maybe these guys are more useful, but their damage is so low, you need a lot of them to do anything meaningful. Yeah, I'm just disappointed. Hopefully people didn't buy a whole bunch of Arena Shades just to get a bunch of these in case they were good.
Well, I don't know. No way. I think people are going to wait for the box.
Hope so. I hope they did.
Way. Yeah.
Myrnmourn Banshees have been functionally changed, but they're still pretty much the same unit. This like anti-magic supporting unit. So in 3rd edition, they don't unbind or dispel in the same way that you normally would. Instead, you try to unbind a spell after it's cast, after the target is picked, and if it's a target near them, they can try to unbind the spell again, which is very interesting. It effectively gives you a second chance at unbinding the spell, and same with dispelling. If an endless spell finishes a move near them, they can immediately try to dispel it. So this is like, in addition to the standard unbinds that your army would get, you now get this extra unbind.
You have unlimited unbinds against things that target your units, like directly target your friendly units.
Yeah, and that's an interesting ability. Now, there's a lot of downsides. Obviously, it can only unbind spells that pick a unit, right? So if it's a spell that just does something to every unit nearby or affects the caster that's not picking, it only the picked unit has to be within 12 inches. Wholly within 12 inches, right? It can't just like be anywhere on the board 30 inches away like standard unbinding. And it only dispels predatory endless spells, and there's a bunch of them that are, even if endless spells were useful, a bunch of them are stationary, like the shackles. You can't do anything against them. And it still has to finish within 6 inches of them. So it can just pass by them and finish 6.1 inches, and then they just can't do anything. Their damage is poor. They're only 4 wounds. They're never battle line, so they can't fill a slot in that way. They're just not a useful unit, unfortunately. They have a very specific niche, and they're not very good at it, and that niche is not very good either.
Yeah. I guess the other thing we didn't mention is like the unbind, I think, happens on the roll. Is it the casting roll or casting value? Because I think that because there are some unbinds that care, like for instance, Kragnos cares about what the casting value of the spell is, right? Like if your lightning blast goes off on a 5, he has to roll a 5 on 3d6. What do these guys have to do?
I believe it's higher than the casting value of the spell.
Yep.
Oh wow! And if they're in units of, wow, so that means so this is actually really, really good. Like if you're fighting like Legion of the First Prince or Tzeentch, and they target you with that Tzeentch's Firestorm, this means you're basically, if you roll an 8 on 2d6, you're going to be unbinding that spell. It's pretty good.
Now that is a weakness that Nighthaunt have, right? But you're still leaving that to a dice roll over the casting value of the spell. And that unit that you're picking has to be wholly within range of this unit. So you have these really tight formations. This unit can just get sniped because it's only 4 wounds, and then they can just cast the spell. Like it's so situational. In a lot of matchups, it does nothing. Even against some armies that use magic, you're not getting hit with spells that pick units. Yeah.
Yeah, well, if Tzeentch and Seraphon get a new book and we see magic-heavy armies for a while, this will see play. Otherwise, yeah, you're better off using Spirit Host because whatever they're trying to snipe, if it's a hero, you'll be protected.
I agree. Yeah, in the most part, like the specific niche these guys have is protecting your 30 block or 2 30 blocks from anti-horde spells. But
or anything and debuff spells like the ones in
Yeah.
Soulblight Gravelords or anything. But yeah, like not currently, but could change depending on the meta. Is what I'll put it as.
yeah, right now they're D. They're not particularly useful. It is a cool ability. It's not like these guys are F tier. They could be good in the future. I'm not seeing it right now.
Mhm.
I can't wait until like 2 weeks from now. It turns out these guys are amazing and we're completely wrong and everybody's using at least one squad.
I'll tell you this: if AOS had like a sideboard mechanic, like this unit would be in every sideboard. This is the ultimate definition of a sideboard unit.
Yeah.
I would absolutely switch out like a chain. Like if I was fighting Tzeentch or Legion of the First Prince or Seraphon, I would absolutely switch like a cheap Chainrasps unit out for this unit.
I could see that. Yeah, if you have enough battle line slots filled.
Mm-hmm.
The Black Coach. We're going to take this one because I think you've had an interesting journey examining this model.
So yeah, it's weird. So I'll be honest. I don't play Nighthaunt. One of my good friends, Laurent, does. And from what I can see, I mean, the impressions of most people are it's a really, really good model. It's one of the few sources of constant teleporting. It's got reduced movement, but it still flies and it still moves. It's pretty fast. It keeps up with the army pretty fast. It's got it lost its rerolls, but this is Age of Sigmar 3.0. Everyone's losing rerolls, so it's not a huge issue. And its main thing now, it always has a 5 ward, which is great, which means you're not really expending CP on it to discorporate it, which really increases its survivability on that 4-up ethereal. Its main thing now is the shooting attack. Now, the way that works is enemy models that die wholly within 12 of this, or flee. Enemy models that are slain or flee within 12 of this model increase the count of a dice near it, and when that dice goes to 5 or 6, which means if you terrify, like if you make 5 models either die or flee, you can unleash a 3d3 mortal wound once per game in the shooting phase, and then you go back to 1 on the dice. And this ability is really good because this army does not have a lot of mortal wounds around it. Being able to do 3d3, just snipe out a crucial support hero or just deal a few mortal wounds in a pinch is a pretty good ability to have. Now, this model is expensive. Like, I think it jumped up almost 100 points, I want to say. This thing used to be like 220, 215, and it's 335 or something, some insane number like that. So you have to use this sparingly because Nighthaunt is like at its core something of a horde army, and this takes up a lot of points. Like you're effectively losing 20 Grimghast Reapers or like 20 Bladegeists when you're bringing this.
Yep.
So knowing how to use this, yeah.
It's also not filling a battle line slot, which when you're spending that many points, you really, really want to be doing that. And it's not a leader slot, so you can put it in Hunters of the Heartland, but do you want to? This
thing isn't really engaging monster. I mean, it can. It's not the worst thing to engage a monster. I mean, the good thing to note is if you're not engaged, it's got a bit of versatility because when that evocation dice goes up to a 5 or 6, you don't have to unleash the shooting attack. What you can do is make it even more tankier because when the dice is a 5 to 6, your ward goes to a 4-up automatically. It's
weird that that it says 5 to 6. So if you have 5 to 6, you have a ward of 4+. If the dice is a 6, then you can do the shooting attack. The shooting ability, I should clarify.
Right.
So, and that shooting ability is really good. Like you said, man, 3d3 mortal wounds in an army that doesn't do mortal wounds is really, really strong. Especially because you can teleport into range and then blast something.
The teleporting every turn means you will get pretty much where you want to, and your opponent's going to have to be really, really careful about how they position themselves.
Yeah, it also does.
Now, I will say, go ahead.
It also does do mortal wounds on the charge, which is interesting. So it can also do mortal wounds on the charge after doing the 3d3 blast. Now, there's a lot of downsides though. It seems like a really good model, like you stick one in every single list, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, when do I actually want this in my list? Because one of the problems here is that it's really hard to stack up that dice, because first off, it only stacks up when enemy models are slain, not when friendly models are slain. And that's a big distinction, because you have to kill enemy models. If you're facing like Fulminators or Gargants or Ogres, which just have like a Frostlord in your face, it's not going to stack up. And if you're not getting the 3d3 Mortal Wound Blast out of this thing, you might as well not bring it. So in a lot of matchups, it's just dead. It's not doing much.
I don't think it's necessarily dead. I think it still needs some dedicated attention to die. 12 wounds on a 4-up ethereal, 5-up ward save natively.
Yeah, but
it's gonna take but if you look at its attack suite, for instance, it's got a ton of 1 damage attacks, something like 17 1 damage attacks, and then it's got 5 attacks with like 3s and 3s or like 4s and 3s minus 2 and 2 damage.
The problem is, of course, that it could just be 20 Grimghast Reapers, right? That's always the problem.
Yeah, the points. Yeah, it's like in some matches it's going to be insane. In matches where you can actually kill models, being able to just reach behind them and snipe out a hero just with mortal wounds and charge and do mortal wounds and teleport around every turn, causing massive headaches for your opponent wherever the engagement might be. That's a really, really good ability to have. Then against highly elite armies like Maw Crushes and Gargants, yeah, it's not going to do much. But then Night Hunt is already like, well, we've discussed this, but 4-up ethereal, 5-up ward means those Alpha Strike armies aren't doing much. Like those armies are already weakened by the rest of your army. So it's not the worst model to have. I can see, while I don't see this as an auto take at all, I see many lists bringing one.
Mm-hmm. There's a few more issues I should bring up that I don't think you've mentioned yet. The 3d3 Mortal Wounds has a chance to just fizzle and do nothing. So you could spend all this effort stacking this thing up, and then you roll a 1. Yeah, and it's gone. Which is really
also,
awful.
you can whiffle on the 3d3 too. Like when we think 3d3, everyone thinks 9, but it could easily mean 3.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of people that care about. Oh, you did 3 more wounds. Okay, fine. My hero lives. My 5-wound hero lives on 2 wounds.
Yeah. Another problem with how this thing stacks up is just Night Hunt as an army don't do tremendous damage before this thing can get in range in order to start stacking it, because enemies have to be within 12 inches. That means you want to teleport into range or just move into range with 10 inches, whatever. But none of the hero phase damage you do pretty much will matter on turn 1 and 2. The shooting is irrelevant in this army. You're not going to kill any models, like we just discussed. Craventhrone Guard aren't good enough. If Craventhrone Guard are good, then the Black Coach gets a lot better, because you can shoot with the Guard and then immediately shoot with the Black Coach, because the Evocation of Death doesn't say at the start of the shooting phase, it's just in the shooting phase. So you could kill a bunch of models with Guard and then blow it up with Black Coach after it teleports into range. That was my first thought when I looked at this book. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get this combo. I'm going to have like a teleporting shooting thing going on. It's going to be great. And it's just really hard to do. Impossible against some armies, and not very useful against the rest of them, I'd say. There's also a lot of other cons of the Black Coach. It's not a hero or a monster. It's just a dude, which is the worst.
Is it a behemoth, actually? No, it's not.
No, it can go in Hunters of the Heartland. Which is actually...
I guess it's a totem, so it gets...
it's got the totem
command
keyword.
ability.
It does anything not issue commands to itself? Like, are there units that need that totem?
No, not that I can think of. They don't really have a holy command system where they need something else to issue the command. So
and if there's like an enemy has a bonus against totems, it's actually a downside.
Yeah, that's true.
So and the last negative thing I want to say about the Black Coach, like you were right, it has a ton of attacks, right? It's got the if you go with the Scythe, you can get a whole bunch of attacks at Rend 2 damage, which is one of the few sources of native Rend 2 without Wave of Terror. Then it's got a whole bunch of these like 4s and 4s, 17 attacks total. If you get a lot of Wave of Terror, that's really a lot of damage from this single model, right? But it needs a lot of Wave of Terror. And, that's not
it needs Wave of Terror to be good. I mean, but that's just that's a Night Hunt problem in general. Like they need once per turn they need to get a unmodified charge of 8 or more in order to do serious work that turn.
Yeah. So this thing just has a lot of issues, and the fact that you could just bring 20 Grimghast Reapers instead makes me wonder. Like you have to take a lot of value from its shooting and from its teleporting, because that's what it does better than any other model. And its teleporting is good. I like the teleport ability a lot, especially that we have a couple lists coming up at the end of this review that get good value out of it. But I just don't think the Black Coach is, it's just not a primary hammer unit. You're not going to build a whole list out of them, and it's not going to carry your list by itself. It's an okay unit in certain situations, which is disappointing, because I really wanted it to be this like super killing centerpiece that just powers up as you kill more stuff, and they just kind of missed the mark for me.
Yep.
Looking at the Krulghast Cruciator, or is it the X-Cruciator? Did I have a typo there?
No, it's Cruciator. Yeah.
Cruciator, okay, all right. I thought it was X-Cruciator. That sounds cooler. No,
GW just takes weird names now.
Something they can copyright, I guess. So in third edition, this guy has double damage in melee now. He went from 1 to 2. He does not have to shoot an enemy with that weird mechanic where you have to shoot something in order to activate his Empowered. No, he doesn't have to do that anymore. And the Empowered effect has been changed from a 5-up ward to -1 damage taken. Oh my god, that ability is so freaking strong. -1 damage taken is incredible.
Insanely good, yeah.
Against so much stuff. Against other stuff, completely useless. But against so much stuff, that -1 damage is insane. If you've ever played against Seraphon with their scaly skin, you know how strong that ability is. Now, the downside, of course, of that ability is that you have to be within 12 inches of an enemy that is terrified. And if enemies are charging you, they're in range of Terrify. They have to be, by definition. Now, the problem is if you're facing something that's not charging you, something that's shooting you, that's those 2 damage shots from long strikes, it's going to take you a while in order to get within Terrify range, which means you have to do some stuff like teleporting units forward and flying into range as well for his aura, because it's only wholly within 12 inches. So you can teleport him directly into range with Vanishing Phantasms, but still another unit has to charge in order to get an enemy terrified.
I view this as it's fine. Don't necessarily have to be an offensive unit. Sometimes units are just defensive. Like, you can sit on an objective with Chainrasps, Bladegheist, Grimghasts. Be like, yeah, come at me. And I'm gonna half your damage potential before you apply any command points or do anything to yourself.
Yep, he definitely fits with the rest of the Nighthaunt book, which is all about just taking options away from your opponent, rotting them down, withering them, making them feel weaker. He's very, very good. I think every Nighthaunt list starts with one of these guys.
I think, okay, so as we go to the other heroes, I actually differ on that opinion. I think he is S tier, or at least A tier for sure. I think if Nighthaunt had to drop a hero, I think it would be this one. Because again, like you said, it's really situational. Nighthaunt already have really, really good defense. Like, they have 4-up saves and 5-up wards on demand. And when we go through the other heroes, we'll discuss how other heroes are so much more useful.
Yeah,
but
okay.
If they had to drop a hero, this would be the first to go.
I wouldn't say first, but I would say maybe one other hero in the book that I would 100% never drop. This guy I might drop if I'm trying to fit battle regiments. The other hero I would never drop. So I guess technically, yeah. I would just the way I would play Nighthaunt, I'd have a Krulghast in every list. I really, really like this effect.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So S tier, easy S tier as well. No debating about that.
-1 damage is really strong. If you don't believe that, look at Seraphon's 66% win rate.
Yeah.
Yep.
So looking at another support hero, the Spirit Torment had this weird ability in 3rd edition where if you killed stuff, you could revive models sometimes. It was really unnecessarily complicated. It's just been completely rewritten now. At the end of the combat phase, even if nothing was slain, you just revive a bunch of dudes. You revive 3 wounds of summonable units. So that's 3 Grimghast Reapers or a Spirit Host every single turn. Your turn, enemy turn, you're just reviving models every turn. Can't be dispelled, can't be unbound, can't be stopped with a roar, just reviving models every turn.
You'll see one of these in every list, at least one.
I don't, again, like what you just told me about the Krulghast, I don't think every list, but I think he's very good, and I think the good lists will use him because they'll lean into this style. Now,
well, yeah, I see that.
He did lose his reroll hit 1 aura, which is unfortunate, but there's other bonuses to hit in the book, so it's not the biggest deal. Like, he's good at his revival thing, and that's all you need him for. Yeah.
He's the guy who comes with the Chainghasts, correct? Or the Chainghasts love him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's
go to the Chainghasts.
So let's take So real quick, Spirit Torment A tier, very strong ability because it's one of the few things that works against long range shooting. We discussed the Krulghast has trouble dealing with shooting armies, but when you're reviving 3 models a turn, you're less impacted by it, which is great. That also happens.
One of the few. Yeah. It's also one of the few sources of revival. Nighthaunt don't actually have a lot of revival in their army. Not auto revival like the other death books have.
Yeah. It is also worth noting that if you revive models, they still count towards your battle shock score. So if you lost 10 models when you go to roll Battle Shock, you still count as doing 10 models, even if you revive 3 of them before Battle Shock. I'm like 90% sure that's correct.
Yeah, it's not like Necron reanimation protocol, so you will
Right.
still take full battle shock.
So Chainghasts are a different unit from the Spirit Torment. They're 2 separate units. You don't have to bring both. You can just bring one or the other. Chainghasts have like a fairly weak shooting attack. It is a shooting attack, right? So if you, in theory, bring enough of these guys, you could power up a Black Coach or do some damage in order to empower the Harridans. So that's a thing. But the reroll hit 1 aura is now a +1 hit aura. And that's the reason you would bring these guys, is that Nighthaunt units wholly within 12 have +1 to hit. Only works on melee weapons, so that's another point against the Craventhrone Guard, is that there's really no efficient way to buff them. The Spirit Torment has to be in your army, and it has to be on the battlefield in order for that aura to work. So if you have a Spirit Torment, you can bring Chainghasts. Chainghasts are never worth bringing unless you have a Spirit Torment. That's easy to say. And that ability is really good, because you can actually take like 2 of these guys and spread them out across your army and have a huge +1 hit aura. It's like having a Toro line. It makes everything run smoother. You don't have to spend command points on all-out attack. They are their own unit, so you could just charge them in to try to get another wave of terror debuff. And they're not a leader slot, so they're pretty easy to fit into most battalions. Now, they're 95 points, and they're 2 models with 2 wounds, so that's not going to last very long. Their damage is not great, and it's very easy for units to get out of that charge range. It's if you play any army with wholly within 12-inch auras, it's very easy to charge 9 inches, and then units just pile in another 3, and they're just ever so slightly out because you're not meticulous with your positioning. So that's a sucky thing. They do take up a slot in a battalion, so if you're trying to run a battle regiment, you have limited slots. That sucks. These guys aren't great for that. And even when you have a Spirit Torment, sometimes you just can't find 95 points for these guys. And you think, well, that's crazy because all-out attack on everything in range, but there's a hero coming up that kind of offsets that you'll pretty much use in every list. So yeah, B tier seems about right. They're a useful support piece. They're just fragile. They're easy to kill. If there's ever battle tactics that involve just, these guys could be a liability in the future. Just having low wound weak units could be a liability.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's what holds them back.
Yeah, but the combo of Spirit Torment and Chainghasts, I think, is really solid. You're reviving models every single turn, and you're giving everything around them +1 hit. Overall, it's a package I would use in a lot of lists.
Yeah, that's fair.
The Knight of Shrouds. So going from 2nd edition to 3rd edition, he gained an attack. So now he hits kind of like a Lord Celestant, 3s and 3s, 5 attacks, around 1/2 damage. Stolen Hours heals him when you slay any type of unit instead of the specific ones you had to kill before, but it only heals you once per turn instead of unlimited numbers of times. And unfortunately, he lost his +1 hit aura, which is really, really unfortunate, because that was a fantastic ability that, if he still had that, he probably would see play in most lists. Like, yeah, I would definitely take him over Chainghasts, I think. So pros, Stolen Hours also gives him a permanent +1 to wounds. So if you keep killing stuff, he can theoretically get to infinite wounds, which would be funny to see. He can issue Redeploy or Unleash Hell once per round for free to a summonable unit. And he fights at the same time as a summonable unit. He's got that kind of ability where after he fights, you can pick a summonable unit and it can fight immediately. So it effectively just lets him skip ahead and fight alongside with a unit that he's fighting with. The downsides are he's fragile. He's only 5 wounds, right? A lot of the other heroes we looked at here, like the Cruciator, was 6 wounds. His damage is like whatever. Why do you need his damage? Why would you want him fighting? You don't want to expose your heroes in that way. But the main question is, when do you want to spend 135 points to get a command point per turn that can only be used on Redeploy or Unleash Hell? I can just never think
I don't even know. Yeah, like Unleash Hell for Nighthaunt. Like, wow, they really wanted to lead into Craventhrone Guard. It's so weird. Yeah, I don't. This unit is not that good. It's just not that good. That's it. Like, sure, why is Nighthaunt redeploying? Okay, maybe to get more models on objectives. Maybe to get a unit closer to charge. Perhaps. Sure.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. I think I like the idea of him issuing commands for free. I think that's really cool and fitting, and that would be really useful if it could be even all-out attack. I think that would be really useful, but it's just nothing. Redeploy and Unleash Hell is just terrible. No amount of point reductions would make this guy playable, in my opinion. So he is our first unfortunate F tier unit.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at the Knight of Shrouds on Ethereal Steed, pretty much everything that happened to the Knight of Shrouds on foot happened to this guy. His attack went up, Stolen Hours was changed. He also lost his unique aura, which used to be +1 attack. And it's been replaced with being able to issue all-out attack once per round for free. He is faster than the Knight of Shrouds on foot. He's a 12-inch flying move, which is interesting. But still, why would you spend 155 points to only get a command point per turn that can only be used on all-out attack? What kind of list needs that? I just can't see it.
Yeah, I don't really see it either. Yeah, no, he's bad. Moving on. I have nothing to say. Just I think he goes in the bin, same as the Lord Economon Griff Charger. I mean, Griff Charger, you could say has some utility, but I think both the Soul Wars models are just they're just not that good for third edition. They're not the focus.
For 160 points, you could get Hexwraiths that also have a 12-inch flying move. So, yep, terrible. And rounding out the terrible trio is the Cairn Wraith. He doesn't reroll or deal mortal wounds on hit rolls of 6, but he's a little more accurate. And his 3 attacks are now replaced with attacks equal to the number of enemy models within 3 inches, which is an interesting little niche that nothing else in this army has. You could give him some offensive artifacts. We'll talk about them later when we get to the allegiance abilities, and potentially make him run 4. But the downsides are he's only 5 wounds. He only fights like he's just a beatstick hero, but he has nothing that gets him into combat any better than anybody else. And I don't know why you would use artifacts on this guy. And he's 115 points. Like, I'd rather have 10 Chainrasps. I'd rather so many things. I would rather so many things than this guy. And I don't think it's an issue that points can fix. If this guy was 80 points, I still wouldn't bring him.
Scything is only really a good ability when you have a unit that does it because of the reach of that 3-inch aura. Realistically, this guy can only ever get max like 7 or 8 attacks.
Yeah.
Like,
you know what else is good against fighting hordes? Grimghast Reapers.
Grimghast Reapers.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Just no. Pass. F tier, unfortunately.
Yep.
Let's take that terrible taste out of our mouths.
Use it as a Grimghast Reaper. Put it on a 32.
Yeah, make him the leader of the unit.
Yeah, boom. There you go.
But let's get that terrible taste out of our mouths and get the Tomb Banshee. I most improved unit. It has to be, right?
Wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, it had this really cool like shooting mortal wound thing going on in the previous one, which it was okay. And frankly, I think if it stuck around, it would have been better because you could have powered up the Black Coach. But I really like what the Tomb Banshee does now. So it's a more relevant melee attacker, right? It's got bonus attacks, it's got more hit, it's got Rend 2. Its Scream is changed to a missile weapon, so it can still do a little bit of damage at range. D3 and Rend 2 isn't nothing. But the main thing going on with the Tomb Banshee now is that she has a new ability that increases the cost of enemy commands on units near her. So how that works is at the end of the charge phase, you roll a dice for a unit within 12 inches, and on a 4-up, it costs 1 more command point to issue a command to that unit. So if you wanted to issue All-Out Defense, it costs 2 command points now. If you wanted to issue Inspiring Presence, that costs 2 command points now. And unless they start releasing armies that just generate tons of command points, that's an incredibly strong ability, effectively turning off a lot of commands in the game. Not only because by the time you get to the combat phase, players may not have that many command points left. So if they only have 1 command point, well, that unit's just not using commands at all. And then increasing the cost of it makes people reconsider, oh, well, maybe All-Out Defense isn't worth using here because it would cost me both of my command points,
it's a really, really good ability for 115 points and something that triggers in both turns.
Right, especially because it activates at the end of your charge phase, which means you can just teleport her into range with Vanishing Phantasms. And if there's a unit that finished a charge and the enemy's terrified, then you get +1 to the roll, so it activates on a 3-up. You can, and the best part of this ability, and why I think she's rated A tier for us, is that this ability lasts until your next hero phase. So you shut down Inspiring Presence, you shut down all at defense, you shut down Fire Slayers fighting first, you shut down all that stuff in the combat and battle shock phase. Then on your opponent's turn, that unit can't rally, it can't run 6, it can't reroll charges, it can't all-out attack. Well, it can do these things, but like it costs 2 command points each. How desperate is your opponent to use stuff like that, right? Really, really powerful ability. Thinking about it against like Stormcast, for example, if you can get her in range to scream at some long strike raptors, then the Stormcast player has to pay 2 command points in order to Thunderbolt volley with them. It's very powerful. In particular against Fire Slayers, because one of the things Nighthaunt is going to struggle with, I think, is enemies that fight first and just blow them up before they have a chance to fight. So increasing the cost of commands is really good against that. And if you combine it with Kurdoss, who we're going to talk about soon, you can just actually stop your opponent from using any command abilities on that unit because you steal their command points and then increase the cost of their abilities. Really, really dirty gameplay. The downsides, she's 5 wounds, pretty easy to kill if your opponent really wants to dedicate damage into her. Like you need Spirit Hosts around her to keep her alive. She has 150 points and does take up a leader slot, so really hard to fit her into Battle Regiment, and then frankly, there's just better heroes for that Battle Regiment. She can't stop Unleash Hell because her ability activates at the end of the charge phase, whereas Unleash Hell would happen when the unit finishes a charge. And aside from shutting down commands, she doesn't really do anything. But I think shutting down commands is such a useful thing for this army to do. Nighthaunt are all about controlling how your opponent responds to your aggression and controlling their aggression. Yeah, A tier might be overranking her, but I put her in a lot of lists.
I think her utility, even the thing is, the 4-up is like kind of the iffy part about her. Like you have to roll a 4. The fact that you get to do it twice, like in a battle round, means you at least get it off once. But when you do get it off, it's just such a powerful ability to have. I mean, Total Eclipse is a spell that all Techless players use all the time. So the fact that you can just do that to a unit, to whatever it is you're trying to charge and fight, it's pretty strong.
Yeah. Yeah, not just that, you can also, for example, metamorphosis her, and now she is a monster, so she can charge in and then roar to get a 3-up to disable commands as well. So it's effectively giving you a second chance at a 3-up to disable commands, which is very good. So A tier, taking a bit of a gamble on this one. We'll see how it lands. It could be, B or even C, but I'm quite fond of this model. Not the model itself, just the rules. The model is... oh boy, the model needs a refresh. I'd probably use one of the Myrnmourn Banshees as a proxy. Looking at Lord Executioner. This guy was in the Soul Wars box, but then he got his own release, kind of like the Lord Ordinator. He's got more attacks and more damage, so he's on 5 attacks, 3s and 3s. Ren 2 damage apiece. So he's actually a decent fighter. And his -1 hit effect has been changed to a -1 wound effect, and it works on any unit, not just a hero. So he's kind of like a Dreadscythe Harridan unit, where you charge him in, do a bit of damage, and pick an enemy unit, and it has -1 to wound. Now, unlike Dreadscythes, he doesn't have to charge. So if you're playing defensively and an enemy is charging you, this guy could just pick an enemy unit, and bam, it has -1 to wound, which is really good against stuff like Iron Jaws. It's really good against Daughters of Cain. The problem is that you're spending 140 points to do that. And I can't see a lot of times, because there's so many other support heroes you really, really want. Sometimes you're even going up to 6 heroes in a list, and this guy just literally can't be brought because you're at your leader cap. And
it's not worth not worth a. I don't think it's worth a hero slot.
No.
Like the effect is cool, but if I really cared about -1 to wound, but it's only like that phase, It's like, nah, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. We might be sleeping on this guy, maybe. But...
maybe if like I feel like there could be a meta maybe where Nighthaunt is just really, really worried about a riposte, and having that -1 to wound really helps out. But I don't see it worth a hero slot right now. Nighthaunt are already like a 5-hero army. So the more heroes you take, the more they're sacrificing units.
Yeah.
So,
I'd much rather try to squeeze out 10 Harridans than pay 140 for this guy. Now you could give him some interesting artifacts we'll talk about in the allegiance section, which could make him more viable. But at 140 points, he's competing with other support heroes. He's not competing with units, and I think the other support heroes are just better.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Guardian of Souls, +1 damage in 3rd edition, doesn't matter. The artifact that he used to take pretty much all the time, where he got an extra reviving D6 models, that's been removed, so his spell's only reviving D6 models. But yeah, the Guardian Souls is fantastic. I think actually the best single War Scroll in this entire book. He's like the Lord Relictor of this faction. You take one in every single list. He's the only hero that can use the Midnight Tome, which is an incredibly strong artifact that lets you automatically cast an endless spell that can't be unbound, which is such a strong effect that you want it in your army almost all the time. He also gives all Nighthaunt units +1 to wound, but only with their melee weapons, so Guard don't get any bonuses there. And he also still has a D6 revive spell. So like, this guy just does every bit of support that you need. It's amazing.
I mean, you need a wizard. He's a wizard. That's it. Like, if you're not playing Olynder, and we'll talk about Olynder, you play him. And yeah, you need magic in this army. So
I think he's actually the only non-unique wizard in the army as well. So if you actually want to take one of these artifacts that requires being a wizard, you have to take him. And he's a wizard that revives your hammers and also gives them a +1 to wound aura. Amazing.
Yeah.
Really hard to find. Really hard to find downsides. You know, he has 5 wounds, but when he's backed up by Spirit Hosts,
you're not going to see a list without one of these guys. At least.
Sometimes
like, that's not going to happen.
Frankly.
Yeah, like at least one. Yeah,
because he's the only wizard. So if you want to bring stuff like the Seal of Shyish or Shade Mist, you might be bringing a second copy of this guy. He's that good. So yeah, this is the one model I would never replace from a Nighthaunt list. Every list starts down whatever points this guy is. I think he's 150.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so every Nighthaunt list is actually 1850 plus Guardian of Souls. Done.
Yep.
The Dreadblade Harrow. We're going to run us through this one because he's really techy. He's a really interesting piece.
So this guy basically is okay. So another weird hero for surprise Nighthaunt full of heroes. There's a few changes like to the damage and attacks and hitting and wounding characteristics, but the main thing is and it teleports even in combat. So it's kind of like our Griff Charger where it like just gets out of combat and can teleport where it needs to. Its real use, however, is CP efficiency. And we talked a lot on the Stormkeep about how good Tolerons are because they give a +1 to hit just automatically. This guy basically duplicates a command ability if your general, so not just any hero, not the unit itself, it has to be issued by the general, issues a command, it can immediately issue it to another unit. And that's amazing because now you're talking about 2 Discorporates per turn. And even if you use it on other things like redeploy, 2 redeploys a turn, 2 all-out attacks a turn if you don't happen to have Chainghasts in your army. That's really, really, really good. And this works on any command abilities. And when we discuss more command abilities, we'll talk about like Nagash and Awlrach, what they do. But they are also doubled, and that's insane. That's really, really good.
Yeah.
CP efficiency is something you need in this army. And this is your unit to do that.
We had a lot of trouble ranking this guy. I really went back and forth on how useful is it to actually have 2 of the same command once per round. So there's going to be a lot of times where you get charged on different flanks and you have 2 different units that you want to use Discorporate on. Bam, you buff them both at the same time. You could be playing against a shooting list that's going to try to shoot one of your main units, and then as soon as you pop Discorporate, they're going to switch targets and pick another one. You just use it on both preemptively, which is really good.
It's pretty good. Like Lumineth have a subfaction that does this exact same thing, and they used it all the time before they nerfed Unleash Hell. Ironjaw still does it. Like the entire reason the Makrasha exists is to issue 3 all-out defenses, 3 all-out attacks, whatever the Ironjaw player needs at that moment in time. So just having that in Nighthaunt is just pretty good. Really good.
And the best part about it is that you don't have to use this command immediately, right? So if your opponent, like you use this as you need it, right? So you don't have to immediately declare 2 targets for Discorporate. You can say, well, okay, my general is going to issue Discorporate, and then at some point in that same phase, the Dreadblade Harrow can also issue it, or just not, and wait for another command later in the turn or later in the round, depending on what you need. There's a lot of also interesting stuff you can do being a hero that can just teleport every turn. You can do stuff like give him an Arcane Tome. He can cast Metamorphosis on himself, and then he can just teleport to enemy terrain and smash it, which is going to become more and more relevant as time goes on. There's a lot of just neat tricks you can do with this guy. Now, there are some downsides. You can't teleport to within 1 inch of a terrain feature, but like most rampages, Smash to Rubble just requires you being within 3 inches, I think. Now, the main downside is that his ability only works on commands issued by a general, which means he cannot be the general because you can't issue the same command more than once per phase. So even if he's the general, he can't double issue the command. So he's kind of this support unit. He's like a 4th string support hero, but he's so good, right? That you kind of just want to bring him. Unless you're going Battle Regiment, or if you are going Battle Regiment, you have a very specific plan using like Awlrach and something like that. He's just really versatile and fits into a lot of lists. So I think, like I said, we struggled ranking this guy because it's hard to say, is a second command each turn worth 145 points? Would you bring more of this guy? Would you bring 3 of them and then have 4 of the same command? Like, where's the value and how much is it actually worth? But I think people are going to use 1. So, and he's good. So I think A tier seems appropriate because you can bring more than one of these guys. So would you bring 3 of these guys and have quadruple commands?
No, I don't. I think the way the points work out in the Nighthaunt army, most Nighthaunt armies are going to have what I like to call 4 to 5 heroes, 2 blocks of whatever it is, like big blocks, and then the rest are going to be MSU. Or sometimes you might even see something like 1 big block and a bunch of MSU. So duplicating that command over 2 units is, I think, more than enough. I don't think you'll ever need a time where you have to duplicate it 3 times. Or sorry, triplicate it, I guess. That's the word.
Yeah, it's really marginal. The second one, there's going to be also a lot of situations where you just don't get that much value from having a second copy of a command. But even if you use it on something just like a run 6, you get 2 units where they need to be. That is good value. And yeah, we'll see where this one shakes out. It's a really weird war scroll. It's hard to evaluate it.
Mm-hmm.
This one's easy to evaluate. James, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, sure. Really, really wordy war scroll for anybody that's read this one. Once per phase, you can pass 1 wound to a summonable unit within 6, or is it wholly within 6 or just within 6 inches?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's terrible. For a 1 wound army, that's primarily. Yeah.
And it can deal 2d6 mortal wounds onto an enemy hero. Now the cons of this, you have to roll lower than the current battle round to issue those mortal wounds. You can't do this on an enemy death army. It doesn't stack, so you can't do multiple Scriptor Mortises to nix out an enemy hero. And it has no good melee profile.
Yeah, why does this exist? I don't even know.
It could have been a really cool supporting wizard, but no, it's just not. It just very rarely does 2d6 mortal wounds.
Yeah.
And the worst part is that it could fail up to and including round 5. You could fail the roll every single time. And then, even if you make it, you can still roll low on the 2d6. It's just...
Yeah.
And it's only once per game that you're doing this, because you pick 1 enemy hero, right?
Yeah, it's like, you're writing their name down and then you're doing this. So if the hero dies to something else, well, suddenly your Scriptor Mortis is useless.
I think you can do it to another hero if that hero is killed. So, like, in theory, this guy could be chain sniping heroes back to back to back. But, oh god, what are the odds of that happening? It's so poor, and why would you pay points for that effect?
I don't know. If they had, like, done something cool with it, like, tie it to Emerald Host, like make it Emerald Host only. And we'll discuss what Emerald Host does, but like add 1 to the number of mortal wounds inflicted by that ability if it's a hero that you've written the name down of.
Oh yeah. He'd be great.
Like that could have been cool. Yeah, that would have been good. That would have been like, okay, I'll take this specifically in this subfaction for this combo. But yeah, as it stands, like first 2 battle rounds, it's not going to do anything. Like most of the time, like this is going to be something that's useful round 3 onwards. Unfortunately, most games of Age of Sigmar are kind of over by round 3, round 4. Anyway, so
yeah, just terrible.
I guess if you're playing against Gargants, because those games tend to go till. I'm trying to think of like games where like you'll go till 5 and the enemy hero has like wounds to where they'll survive. Like maybe against like if Archaon and all these like gods are seeing play. Sure, I could see this.
Disappointing.
Yeah.
Nagash, Supreme Lord of the Undead. He has the exact same war scroll that he had in the December 2021 battle scroll, which we covered on one of our live streams. So we're not going to go over all the changes again. Suffice to say, he is 16 wounds and 3 up save, and he has a 4 board against mortals, so he's durable. For 955 points, not very durable, but as a single model, he can absorb a lot of damage. He can also save stack. Unlike everything else in the Night Haunt army, he can actually use their Finest Hour to get a save bonus. He can use Mystic Shield. He can use All Out Defense. He can use all these tools that the other units aren't using, so there's basically no opportunity cost for them. He's also a monster, so you get rampages, bonus victory points in Gur. You can score battle tactics if you have him in your list that you couldn't score with Night Haunt, like Monstrous Takeover, for example. He always has the reliable combo of Hand of Dust and Spell Portal, and you just instantly kill stuff. That's always fun. He learns...
I will say he has... Yep, he knows every Night Haunt spell, and it's probably the best speller in the game. So, in depth, anyway.
Yeah, Night Haunt spells are very good for Nagash. He really likes casting them. And he's a very reliable caster. Or, worst case scenario, you just cast Arcane Bolt 8 times. And then you charge and you just deal 16 mortal wounds on average. Stupid. He only moves 9 inches, but he learns a teleport spell, which is cast value 4, and he has a +3, so unless he miscasts, he just can't fail it. So he can just teleport every turn. Downsides are he's very expensive. Like, really, really expensive. And Night Haunt are kind of like a summary of their parts kind of army where you want to spend all your points either on units that you're buffing or on the units that are buffing them. So finding 955 points means you're forming an entire list around Nagash. And frankly, it's not obvious what that list is going to look like. Is it Hexwraiths that are doing ping mortal wounds every time they charge an Emerald Host? Is it you still bring a block of 30 Grimghast and like a Krulghast and a Guardian of Souls, and then you just have... You have Nagash run up the middle and try to soak all the damage and kill everything. Like, these lists are not obvious to see what they're going to be because he doesn't benefit from any of the Allegiance abilities, none of the Night Haunt keyword abilities, right? So he can't actually buff himself with 2 of the best spells. He can't teleport.
You have to take units that are self-sufficient with him. So most of the Night Haunt units become good with a cast of 4 heroes. Your cast of 4 heroes goes out in favor of Nagash, so you have to make sure. You have to take units that are self-sufficient or can only be buffed by the spell lore. Like, that has to be enough.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he can't cast the Night Haunt in the spells, which, man, that would be great, because the Night Haunt and the spells are actually good and worth bringing. So it would have been nice if he could cast them, but no, he can't do that. He isn't ethereal, so he can't retreat and charge. He can't. He doesn't get a 6-up ward, so he's actually just taking damage as damage, which is weird for a death unit to not have a ward. And your opponent will put all of their damage into him. So if you get hit before you Mystic Shield, or if you don't have Finest Hour available, or you aren't able to use a command because of Roar or something, Nagash is just going to die. He is the biggest threat. If your opponent kills him, he pretty much wins the game. And then there's always the joy of miscasting and losing 955 points in the first turn because you rolled Snake Eyes on your first cast and you've done nothing with your God model. Joy, just absolute joy. So Nagash is really hard to rank. He's obviously not bad. Like, any list with him is going to be somewhat useful at least. So I think we're just going to land.
It's just not great.
Yeah, there's just better options.
Yeah. I mean, it'll still go like 3-2 easily, like with some good amount of play against some armies. But it generally is not going to. It's not a great list.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with it, but there's better options. Lady Olynder, on the other hand, is greatly improved. Her damage went up, right? She just straight up got an extra attack and more consistent damage too instead of D3. She always counts as the general with War Master, which is really useful with the Dreadblade Harrow because any command issued by Olynder could be copied by a Dreadblade Harrow. Her D6 heal was replaced with a 4-up ward, which is way better. I would much rather have a 4-up ward than a D6 heal once per phase. Her ability that resurrected 1 Night Haunt model from each unit is D6 models now, but it's only once per battle. So once per battle, you revive D6 models from every unit. Oh man, that ability is strong.
Oh man. 2 wound Hexwraiths. Oh my god.
Your Hexwraiths, your Spirit Hosts, D6 Grimghast, D6 Chainrasps from your screen. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. The fact that it's only once per battle almost doesn't even matter because she was always shot off the table turn 1 anyway before she could use it.
Yeah.
So being only once
now
per
she has
battle,
a ward.
She has a ward and she has Spirit Hosts as well.
Yep.
Her Lifting the Veil ability is now in the shooting phase. It was in the hero phase. This is the one that just deals mortal wounds to an enemy within 12 inches. So being in the shooting phase is much better because you can move and then use it instead of having it activate and then you move into range of it. So looking at the pros here, we didn't really mention a lot of wizards in the Nighthaunt army because there aren't many. They're all special characters. Guardian of Souls is the only one. So being a 2-cast wizard with 2 unbinds is actually really useful, especially since we mentioned when we were talking about Nagash how good the Nighthaunt spells are. They are very good. A lot of good stuff in there, so you want to have some wizards. Worst case scenario, she just casts Metamorphosis on herself and can roar enemy units.
Yeah.
Her signature spell's not bad either. It gives an enemy unit within 18 inches -1 to hit rolls, and your Nighthaunt have +1 to hit against them. So kind of
really good.
Yeah, saves you command points from all-out attack. You don't necessarily have to bring Chainghasts. Now, she doesn't have any bonuses to casting, so what good is any of this, right? But there's a lot of other stuff going on. Like, for example, enemy units within 12 inches, if they get issued a command on a 5-up, no, they're just not issued that command. The command point is spent. The unit counts as receiving. It counts as being issued. It just doesn't happen. It just gets interrupted at the very end. It's so stupid.
Pretty good. Yeah, 5-up deny is really good.
Yeah, you're never going to rely on this, but if you think about like a 3-up Roar and then a 3-up Tomb Banshee and then a 5-up to just deny it outright with Lady Olynder, you're really messing with your enemy's commands. The odds of them getting a successful command off is pretty low. Being able to revive D6 models from every Nighthaunt unit is really powerful because you can revive with her and then revive with the Guardian of Souls and his spell, and then every combat phase you're reviving with a Spirit Torment. So you can just really pump your units back up as long as they don't get wiped out. And her Lifting the Veil is D6 mortal wounds to an enemy unit every shooting phase. And that's not a missile weapon, so you can run and then use it if you need to in a pinch. Unfortunately, you can't use Unleash Hell, but yeah, just doing D6 mortal wounds to a unit within 12 inches is quite good. I'm just going to quickly go.
Yeah.
It is a 2+ to activate that ability, so it has a chance to fail, but 2+ D6 mortals in this army out of all the other armies is really good. So you could actually make like a competent...
Do you like Stormgrave Guard, Dragon Breath?
Yeah.
That's what that is.
Yeah.
It's better.
It's better because it always rolls the D6.
Yeah.
And she actually combos pretty well with the Black Coach because she can, with the Lord of the Underworlds, teleport herself in range, use the Veil, and if it kills a bunch of models, the Black Coach can immediately shoot 3d3. Man, I wish I could take multiple Olenders. Really, I wish I could. So there are some downsides, though, right? She is effectively 14 wounds with her 7 wounds and 4-up save, or 4-up ward. It's good, but like she can still die, right? If you overextend with her, she's going to die. She needs to be surrounded by ghosts so she doesn't just get clubbed to death. She needs spirit hosts, I think, in a pinch to survive against snipers.
Yeah, she's not a beat stick. You're not gonna. None of the Mortarchs, other than maybe Catacross, are. You can't just like put them in the middle of the opponent's army and expect them to survive. No, they'll die.
Yeah, she's accenting everything your army does, making everything better, but she's not going to do everything herself. Another weakness that you got to pay attention to is that her ability activates, her revival ability activates at the start of the hero phase, which means if you deploy her in reserve, she can't use it that turn, and then you have to wait until your next hero phase in order to use it, and she might just die before then. So it's you got to be careful with that. Her damage for 340 points, she could be 2 blocks of Grimghast, so not great damage output. And like I mentioned,
but it's fine. Like none of the Mortarchs really have good. Like no one. Archon doesn't have good damage. Manfred doesn't really have good damage. Like it's fine. They're not meant to. They're sort of meant to be these trick models that play tricks on your opponents and support what their army's trying to do.
Considering the damage that the revived models are going to do, I think she's going to do fine.
Yeah.
And she has no bonuses to casting or unbinding, which, that's a problem. Because there's a lot of spells you want to cast on 6s, and she does not get a bonus to that. Her signature spell is a 7, and everybody knows how it goes casting 7 on a +0. It's just pretty bad.
Not for me.
Yeah.
Not for me.
Well, you can re-roll it with Annihilators.
Oh, even then, I'm a master at 7s.
So, despite those weaknesses, Olynder is very impactful, and her points are appropriate for what she does. So, A tier, you don't just slam her in every list, but a lot of lists can be built with her, and kind of like Bastion and Stormcast, you're not going to feel bad about including her.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at Reikenor the Grimhailer, I was kind of went on a journey with this model. So looking at his changes, he got an extra attack and he got an extra rend, so he's going to do more damage, right? He's not a slouch in combat like some of the other support heroes, especially if you get a Wave of Terror off. Suddenly he's hitting on rend 3, so okay. He is fast. He's a 14-inch flying move, which means he is great as a supporting charge piece, and he can take a mortal wound himself to get +3 to cast, which works with any spell that he casts. It doesn't have to be like his spell or a Night Haunt spell, like any spell. So you can cast neutral on the spells like the Chronomantic Cogs. If he's attacking a priest or wizard, he just automatically gets +1/+1. You don't have to give him all-out attack or any bonuses to wound. And his signature spell deals D3 mortal wounds, and if a model in a unit is slain, it does another D3 mortal wounds. So he's an interesting little wizard that you can reliably cast 2 really good spells in the book with, which are Seal of Shyish and Shade Mist. The problem is that he only casts 1 spell per turn, and he costs 190 points, and he can only learn 1 spell. Now, if he could cast both of these spells, I would pay a lot more points for him, because getting both of those spells on a single platform would be really useful. He is unique, so he can't take any enhancements, except spells, obviously. And the fact that you can take the Midnight Tome really marginalizes him, because one of the things you would use him for is to cast Chronomantic Cogs very reliably. But now that Night Haunt can
or Master of Magic,
Yeah.
Nothing.
But the fact that those exist makes him like,
yeah.
Well, when would I use this guy? When would I want to spend 190 points to cast Shade Mist when I could spend 150 points and cast Shade Mist with a Guardian of Souls? So he doesn't... It's just hard to justify bringing him instead of just bringing a Guardian of Souls that's also got its own good spell and a +1 wound aura. And it's tough.
Yeah, maybe if the command traits Master Magic changes or something, maybe then. But
I wanted to like this guy, I really did. But I never found a place for him. I made one list, and
if you play a magic heavy army, like whether you're not, just maybe the army is completely different. It's not relying on Reapers necessarily. Maybe it's Dreadscythe Harridans and Chainrasps only, and you want magic to successfully unbind your opponent, or debuff your opponent. Sure, then I could see play.
Yeah, potentially, his signature spell could kill 6 models, which would, if you're fighting 1 wound infantry. But it could contribute to powering up a Black Coach, which is really interesting. And with his 14-inch fly move, he's a fast hero. He can get in there for Wave of Terror support. He's not... I think it's just his point cost for me that I could never find a place for him, really. You have to spend a lot of points on endless spells to make him worth bringing, and I think I'd rather not, in most cases. Looking at Kurdoss Valentian, the Craven King, one of the best models ever introduced into Age of Sigmar. He looks like he's got those... What are those 2, Waldorf and Staten, I think, from the Muppets, kind of just up there heckling him, just taunting him the whole time. Fantastic model, and he hits like Galmaraz, right? He's got Rend 3 and Damage 3, so he's hitting like Celestin Prime hits you on turn 2. Now, his little Spirit Hosts there don't do mortal wounds anymore, but whatever, it doesn't matter. He is hitting like Celestin Prime, that's all that matters.
Yeah, totally not salty about
that. Nope. No, we are not the Salt Keep. He has a really unique ability where he can steal command points from the enemy on a 5-up.
If the enemy hero is within 12.
Within 6. Hold on.
Oh, 6, yeah.
So on a 5-up, you can roll a dice.
Oh, within 6. Yeah.
On a 5-up, it happens, and if you're within 6 inches of a hero, it happens on a 4-up. So once every other turn, he's going to be stealing a command point, let's say, but not for the first 2 turns. And he unlocks Craventhrone Guard as battle line. And if you combo him with a bunch of other effects like Lady Olynder and with the Tomb Banshee, you can really deny commands, which is interesting. And not only does he take command points away from your opponent, he generates them for your army. And Night Haunt just love command points. They are really great. But he costs a lot of points to do that and only that. He also can't steal command points if he gets deployed in reserve. Like if you're worried about him getting sniped or something and you put him in Vanishing Phantasms, he can't use his ability there. You can only make it somewhat reliable if you're within 6 inches of an enemy hero, which You can't do that out of reserve, and he's only, I think it's just the standard 8-inch move like everything else, so he's not really getting in there anytime soon. He can't take any enhancements, which would have been neat if he was just a generic hero with this ability. You could take like an Arcane Tome and give him more value. Yeah, his ability is just too random. So if you're discounting that ability, like not putting a lot of value in it because it's not reliable enough, when would you want to take Celestin Prime that doesn't Deep Strike? And sometimes, sorry?
In a Soulblight army.
Yeah, exactly. You would not take him in Nighthaunt. I think he's a great ally unit for a lot of other death armies that could use him, but just
finish your thought there, Paul.
But just not in a Nighthaunt army. I can't find a lot of space for him.
Yeah. On the note of being an ally, though, the fact that you're taking him outside of Nighthaunt takes away his ethereal, and you can start save stacking with him at that point.
That's a funny little combo. Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say that, like, they lose ethereal outside of Nighthaunt.
Still probably not that good. But yeah, he's like 210 points, I think.
10. Yeah, if you need a -3 rend weapon, sure.
Oh, and it
can't
can go up to
see,
Rend 4
like-
or Rend 5 with the Wave of Terror, right?
Yeah, I mean, outside of Nighthaunt too, like -3 rend is pretty dope. Like,
Yeah.
it's just a good thing to have.
It's Celestin Prime syndrome is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The problem is, how do you get him into combat? You have
Right.
to be fighting defensively pretty much with him, and Nighthaunt don't have anything that can force the opponent to come to them, so it's just a strategic misstep.
Well, you could run this alongside like a bunch of Reapers and then have Spirit Hosts run up beside him, and it's like, okay, he can take a hit. Like, the problem with a lot of units like this is like they don't get into combat first, and so they can't initiate on their turns. But if you have Spirit Hosts around this guy, sure, he can take a hit.
Especially if you're stealing the enemy command points.
Yeah, and then you just hit back 5 attacks, -3 rend, 3 damage,
Now-
more if you charge.
He does have 2-inch range on his good weapon, so you could like stick him behind some Chainrasps and strike back. There's some interesting things you can do with him, like a Rend 3.
I've seen this guy see some play. He's fine. He's good.
Yeah,
Like, against melee armies, he's gonna do really well.
nothing wrong with him. I just think there's better choices, especially in the support hero slot.
He's not he's not in an optimized list. He's like, if you want to play like a semi-competitive list, like just on purpose, like see with a handicap what you can do, this is a great unit to have.
Yeah, it's also worth mentioning he does have the Grieving Legion keyword, but that literally doesn't matter because you can use him in any subfaction and none of the abilities affect him in any way. So having that keyword makes a difference.
That's annoyed me a lot in Nighthaunt. It's like they have all these like unique subfactions and they're literally not locked in anything that they're doing.
Yeah,
it's not like, Guard is only affecting Hallowed Knights or whatever. It's like, what is going on? Why even bother?
Yeah, there's no benefit. So, yeah. Looking at Awlrach the Drowner, which is the other new unit in this book. I think it's the last new unit as well. He has this really cool ability. It's a command ability. He teleports himself and any other friendly Nighthaunt unit. And the friendly unit that he teleports can be anywhere. It just has to be visible. It can be within 3 inches of an enemy. It can be on the other side of the board. Doesn't matter. You just pick it, and these two units teleport together more than 9 inches from an enemy. And that ability is so incredibly strong that we've actually been able to form lists just around having access to that ability. But we'll talk about that later. But just know that ability is very good, and it's something only Awlrach can do. His melee profile is decent. He's going to do like 43 damage at Rend 2. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. He can do some mortals on charging. If the charge kills any models, he gets even more attacks. So that's fine. Nothing wrong there.
Beautiful. 175? Have you seen the Lord Impertinent? It's got like 4 attacks. -1 rend, 2 damage.
Yeah, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. He has Totem. I don't know if Totem ever matters because units can just issue to themselves, so whatever.
Yeah.
And we've kind of been talking about it, but if you're using this 9-inch teleport strategy, you really want charge bonuses. And outside of Chronomantic Cogs, Nighthaunt don't have any. So if you're bringing Awlrach, you also want to bring Cogs, for sure.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the units... I would say definitely A tier, though. Mobility is key.
Oh, guys, I'm not sure if we mentioned this at all, but Passage Through the Underworlds is a command.
Yep,
So
definitely mentioned that.
Okay, couple that with the Dreadblade Harrow.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
That is one of the combos that enables a list that you can just teleport a whole bunch of stuff up to your opponent's face round one. And I'm very excited to talk about that list later. Downsides, he himself, for his points, doesn't do a lot of damage. This could be a unit of 10 Bladegeists, so that's a trade-off you're making by bringing him into your list. His command ability costs command points. Surprise. That sucks, because there's a lot of commands you'd rather be using. But it is a powerful ability, so it makes sense. His teleport does get somewhat marginalized by Vanishing Phantasms. Just the ability to put units in reserve already exists, so it's not like you're getting something totally unique to the army. If you need to put like 1 or 2 units in reserve, you already have access to that. Where Awlrach comes in is if you want to put more stuff, teleport more stuff around, make mid-game teleports. Like you have to think of situations where you'd want to teleport outside of Vanishing Phantasms.
Mm-hmm.
And he is unique. So like the other guys we've been talking about, he can't take enhancements, which is really unfortunate. And he has Grieving Legion for some reason. Doesn't matter, but it is worth mentioning. So overall, A tier. He's a very strong unit. If he completely enables a new type of list that Nighthaunt, I don't think Nighthaunt could do this kind of list without this guy. So A tier at least.
Mm-hmm.
And oh boy, Thorns of the Briar Queen.
We don't need to talk about this. Like, it's fine. The
No,
Warband, it's bad.
I want people to understand. I had to write this slide. You have to suffer listening to me talk about it. So
Fair.
The Thorns are now a bodyguard, which is cool. A 3-up bodyguard. Like with the Chainrasp, they now have +1 to wound rolls, and they have 3 attacks apiece instead of the normal 2 attacks that Chainrasp have. So they're like pumped up Chainrasp. They're also 2 wounds apiece. So 12 wounds total, which is more than your typical 10 wounds you get from a Chainrasp unit. The Briar Queen is a wizard. She has a cool signature spell that can half an enemy's movement from 24 inches away, which is really strong. Actually, that's a good spell. But the downsides are that they only move 6 inches, while everything else in the book moves 8. And they have Grieving Legion. They're unique. They can't take any enhancements except spells. Has a good signature spell, but +0 to cast makes it unreliable. The Thorns actually fight worse than a regular unit of Chainrasp. Even though they have more attacks, there's less models, so they end up fighting worse. And it's 280 points. It's 280 points for a crappy unit of Chainrasp and a 1-spell wizard that can't take artifacts.
Yeah, that's not...
A Guardian of Souls and 10 Chainrasp costs less and fills a battle line slot and isn't locked to Grieving Legion. These guys would have to be like 200 points together to be considered worthwhile, because I like that signature spell. I think it's really cool. And having like a Spirit Host Chainrasp combo unit that can bodyguard is pretty neat. But 280 points, what were they thinking? Good God.
No, I don't think they're meant to be played. It's an Underworld Warband, just treat it as such.
Why even have it in the book? Just stop including these guys in battle tomes, please. They're always terrible. Don't get my hopes up that they're going to be good one day. Just get rid of them.
Yeah.
Frustrating. So, onto the Nighthaunt Endless Spells, which are good. I've been down on Endless Spells this edition. I think they've taken a beating. They were stronger in 2nd edition overall. The way they've been modified to work has been a downgrade, in my opinion, and their point costs do not reflect that, unfortunately. But then looking at the Nighthaunt ones, they're actually good. And starting with the Mortalis Terminexus, it was actually so good they had to nerf it from its previous version. They reduced its range from 18 inches to 12 inches. So I'm sure a lot of people have no idea what this does, because who the heck uses Endless Spells, but let me run you through it. This one, you cast on a 6-up, and it's a predatory Endless Spell, and after it moving, you either heal every unit within 6 inches, or on a 2-up, you deal mortal wounds to each unit within 6 inches. So it's like getting hit by a Celestin Prime Comet, right? 6-inch range, D3 mortal wounds, and it has the versatility of you can just pick the effect you need. So if a bunch of your support heroes have taken damage, if your Spirit Host has a wound here or there, you can pop this thing to heal up a bunch of wounds, like on Olynder or your Guardian of Souls, your Cruciator. They've been taking chip damage. Boom, heal everybody up a little bit. Or you just use this thing as a comet every single turn. It just does D3 mortal wounds around it. From a huge threat range. right? Because it has a casting range of 12, and then it moves 8, and then it picks units within 6. So pick a point within 20 inches, and every unit within 6 inches of that takes the D3 mortal wounds. Really strong effect. And it gets better because the Midnight Tome allows you to just auto-cast this. You don't have to roll, you just, bam, it's there. If you don't need to cast the Chronomantic Cogs for some reason, you can just automatically cast this thing and deal a whole bunch of mortal wounds in an area. And mortal wounds are a premium in the Nighthaunt army. There is not, we just reviewed every single unit, there is not a lot of mortal wounds on any of those War Scrolls. I think Olynder and the Black Coach are the only ones. It's slim pickings. So having access to a spell that automatically casts, that repeatedly deals D3 mortal wounds in an area, I think is pretty good, and I think I would even pay 85 points for it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think there's a similar spell in Osirak Bone Reapers, but it has a random move of 2d6. But yeah, it's just a good spell.
Can you imagine this thing if it had an extra 6-inch threat range? Like if it was a 32-inch range, you just hit long strikes with it while being out of their shooting range?
No, that'd be way too good. Yeah. No, I mean, I think they purposefully nerfed Endless Spells this edition, range-wise anyway.
Yeah. Well, this is nerfed compared to its 3rd edition because it got a new War Scroll in the FAQ.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, the biggest downside here is that if you have the Midnight Tome, which we'll talk about later, auto-casting one endless spell, I think that spell is going to always be the Chronomantic Cogs. I don't think you pick a different spell. You need a really good reason not to cast a spell that gives you a charge bonus in Nighthaunt.
Mm-hmm. I think enabling charges for your army is really, really good for Nighthaunt. I think that's what they go for before anything else. I mean, I could see like a control list where you just try to come up the board with bodies, purely just use movement. A more defensive Nighthaunt army that just casts this and sends it out as a deterrent to your opponent. But yeah.
So the Vault of Souls, while the Mortalis Terminexus is good at hitting lots of units in an area, the Vault of Souls is really good at melting down hordes. So let me run you through how this one works. You cast it on a 6, and it moves 8 inches. After moving, you roll a dice for each model within 6 inches. So ideally, let's look at an ideal scenario. You move this thing next to like 30 Witch Elves, and you roll a dice for each one of those Witch Elves. And on a 6, it does a mortal wound to that unit, and it gains like a stack of this buff. Right? Once it reaches 10, it explodes. And when it explodes, on a 2+, it just deals that many mortal wounds. So it effectively deals D6 mortal wounds. And all of these are incremented if the unit is terrified. So if you have a unit engaged with it in melee, you're generating mortal wounds faster, and then your explosion deals more damage as well. And your explosion also deals guaranteed mortal wounds if your unit is terrified. So what this thing is good at is my opponent has 30 skinks, 30 witch elves, 15 judicators. I'm going to toss this spell up. It's going to deal a bunch of mortal wounds to them, and then it's going to explode and deal a bunch of mortal wounds to everything in an area.
I could even see this holding it back. Like, no need to cast it turn 1. Just like move up with your army, wait until some of the main engagements kick off, and then just pop this when you're closer to them.
Yeah, you don't have to be hyper aggressive with it. It is also fairly easy to cast on a 6. It's not like some of these other endless spells that are trying to cast on 7s. It has a pretty good threat range. You cast 6 and then it moves 8, and then you can pick a unit within 6. And so it's a pretty good threat range. And it's one of the few sources of mortal wounds, like the Mortalis Terminexus. Now, the problem is that it stacks way too slowly against some armies, like Stormcast, Ironjaws, Gargants, all these elite armies that don't have a lot of models. You're not going to get it to 10 mortal wounds, and it's not going to explode. And then you're wondering why you spent 85 points on it.
Basically.
But if the meta shifts and we start dealing with heavy skink blobs and witch elf blobs and other Nighthaunt armies, this thing's going to be really good as a tech choice.
Yeah.
So C tier, situationally useful, can come in handy, but I probably won't see it in a lot of lists. And the last of the 3 endless spells, the Shyish Reaper. It's the same as it was in the FAQ, but you can add 1 to the roll if it's terrified. So let me run through how it works. You cast it on a 6, it moves 8 inches, and you roll 2 dice for any unit that it passed over and any unit within 1 inch. And for each roll of those dice that's greater than or equal to the save characteristic, you deal D3 mortal wounds. So if you toss it at some Vindictors, you roll 2 dice, and for each 3+, you deal D3 mortal wounds. And if the unit is terrified, it's on each 2+, it deals D3 mortal wounds. And that's every unit that it passed over. So if you can, teleport your hero into range with one of the Lore of the Underworld spells, then you cast the Shyish Reaper and cut through the enemy army. This thing can do a lot of mortal wounds in one cast. And it also moves after casting it. It has this neat little pivot effect where you can kind of spin around and hit everything in range and then move in one direction, giving it an effective threat range of about 15 inches. It does better against higher save dudes, against Witch Elves, against 6-up save models. It's not going to do a lot of damage. So it's kind of hard to justify bringing it in every list just because it doesn't get consistent value. If you're facing a lot of Iron Jaws, you're facing a lot of Stormcast, this thing is a really good source of mortal wounds against those armies, in particular Iron Jaws with their 3-up Maw Crushes that are going to be a pain for Nighthaunt to kill because any safe stacking is a pain to kill. This guy can come in and potentially do 4 to 6 mortal wounds pretty reliably. But for 70 points, yeah, it's hard to justify. So I think B tier is pretty appropriate.
Yeah.
Talking about Nighthaunt Allegiance abilities now, we're going to use the same scoring system we used when we were looking at War Scrolls. It more or less applies. It's not War Scrolls are just a series of abilities anyway, so it's fine to use this ranking system. Looking at the subfactions first, the Grieving Legion is, I think, a very, very interesting one. It gives you, for any unit with 10 or more models, that unit gains the ability to stop enemies within 3 inches from retreating. And that is really, really good when Nighthaunt can retreat and charge anytime they want while your opponent gets stuck in combat constantly. So even if they have an ability that says they can retreat and charge, like if they're playing, for example, Keltnar, Daughters of Cain, then you just shut that ability off and you say, no, you're going to sit right there. You're going to fight these, 10 Chainrasps or 30 Bladegheist or whatever you have in your army. You're going to sit there and fight them for a turn, and then on my turn, I'm going to retreat and charge them or charge something else. And yeah, it fits perfectly into that style. But more so than just combat, this is really good just for objective control. Like if you can tie down your opponent's army, they're not going anywhere. They have to fight through your ghost, and it's really hard to kill these ghosts. They're very durable when you have everything up. So this is a fantastic.
Really good against those elite model monster armies.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Gargants love just trying to retreat their way to victory, and this stops them from doing that. So if you can catch a Gargant in a bad spot, it's effectively useless until it kills all those ghosts. Now the downsides are that this ability only works if your unit has 10 or more models. So a unit of 5 Hexwraiths won't activate it, and I don't think Hexwraiths are ever worth reinforcing. Units like the Black Coach won't do it, Heroes won't do it. So it's specifically units that you'd want to use as big hammer units anyway. So it is a downside because not everything fits into this, but it's more or less you'll always have a unit that can activate it. Now, if you're...
It's probably nice they balanced it that way, because otherwise people would just use like a Chainghasts unit to tie something down.
Oh yeah, it's such a powerful ability. Like retreating and charging, we always say, is one of the best abilities in Age of Sigmar, and having a subfaction that disables the ability to retreat is crazy good. Another downside of using this kind of playstyle is that you can't use Rally if you're staying in sustained combat, which if you're taking losses while you're trying to force your opponent to pin you down and they're not retreating away from combat in order to get away from you, then that means you're stuck in combat too and you can't rally on your turn. So small downside there. I don't think that would come up very often, and there's other ways to revive, but it is worth mentioning. And the other downside I'd say is that this is the only subfaction that doesn't directly increase your damage or your defense. The Emerald Host just gives you mortal wounds every turn. The Scarlet Doom gives you a bunch of mortal wounds if you're using Bladegheist Revenants. And the Quicksilver Dead allow you to ignore ward rolls if you're using Harridans, whereas this is just purely a tactical ability. It has no direct damage increase, which I think that is actually a big downside because Nighthaunt are not a huge damage army. So looking for additional ways to find more damage, I think, is really important for them because damage is utility in this game. Now, a lot of the named heroes have the Grieving Legion keyword for some reason. It doesn't make any sense because they're not a unit with 10 models, so they'll never activate this ability. And this is all the Grieving Legion does. It doesn't give you any more battle line. It just gives you this ability. It's really strange.
Yeah, I think it's a carryover from like second edition, but unlike the Stormcast book, they don't have any abilities locked to only like specific subfactions. So
Yeah, like we talked about with Awlrach, he can teleport any unit. Like all of the abilities in this book, none of them work on specific subfactions, so there's no reason for that. The units that this subfaction would really like using in terms of hammer units, and you want larger units, so Grimghast Reapers, Bladegheist Revenants, and even little groups of Chainrasps, I think would be preferable in this subfaction as opposed to something like Glaivewraith Stalkers. If you need like a charging supporting unit, I'd rather have a unit of 10 Chainrasp rather than a unit of 4 Glaivewraiths, because Glaivewraiths, although they would get a bonus to charge, they would never activate this ability, and I think this ability is more important than the Glaivewraith bonus to charge. Now, it is worth noting that if you're just using a minimum size unit of 10, as soon as you lose a model, you lose that ability, which is a problem, which might, you want to start bringing things like Spirit Torments because they revive at the end of Battle Shock phase, which means that you would be able to lock your opponent in combat even if you took a loss or two. So I think a Spirit Torment plays really well into this style. I think the Guardian of Souls, same reason. He revives models, and he also has the +1 to wound aura. The Excruciator prevents your unit from dropping below that 10. Tomb Banshee is really good for shutting off offensive and defensive command abilities. And Olynder is really good too. How I envision this kind of style, I think you could play the subfaction really in 2 different ways. One of them is like a typical Night Haunt kind of defensive, move everything forward at the same time kind of list. But I think another way you could do it is with Awlrach and just teleport everything up to your opponent's face on the first turn, try to get as many charges as possible, and lock your opponent down in their deployment. And we have...
Yeah, I think that one's going to become a pretty popular build, especially people who have like tons of Chainrasp boards sitting around.
Yeah. I like that build because you give up a lot in order to get all that, having to take a battle regiment, having to take Awlrach, having to make him your general so that the Dreadblade Harrow can teleport a unit as well. There's a lot of cost that comes with that build, and I think that's a good thing overall.
Yeah.
So Grieving Legion, I think, is A tier. It is a strong subfaction, not quite as good as something like Hallowed Knights, right? It's not like you see it and you're like, gotta play that. That's the subfaction I gotta play. But it is very good regardless. The next one here is the Emerald Host. So at the start of the game, you can pick D3 plus 1 enemy units, so somewhere between 2 and 4 enemy units. 2 and 5, sorry, math. At the end of each round, no, it's 2 and 4. What am I, stupid? At the end of each round, each of those units you picked suffers D3 mortal wounds if you roll a 2-up, or an extra mortal wound if it's a monster. Now, this seems like a no-brainer. Like, this is just does something every single turn. You don't have to tailor your list. You don't have to do anything in particular. You just deal mortal wounds to the enemy almost indiscriminately. But it's just ping mortal wounds.
It's really good. It's so I mean we're going to discuss why we ranked it this way, but just from the offset, killing your opponent's 5 wound support heroes, or being able to just ping them and put pressure on them to where they're not trying to heroic action for recovery, for a command point, or like they're not doing the hero's will or whatever, where they try to unbind a spell. It's pretty good. If you can wipe out their support heroes in 2 turns with a bit of luck, you can really swing the game in your favor. Nighthaunt also like really struggle to kill not only support heroes, but some like really tough monsters that can like save stack on like a 2-up or something. But with this ability, especially if they're monsters like ogres, for instance, against Stonehorns and stuff, Nighthaunt can put some pressure on them every battle round.
Yep, and there's going to be games where you pick this and the Emerald Host ability deals the last like 2 or 3 mortal wounds. You need to finish something off at the end of the round, and it's going to feel amazing. But I think for every one game like that, there's going to be another game where you roll a 1 on the pick D3 plus 1, so you only get to pick 2 units. And then there's also going to be a game where you fail to roll the 2-up in order to deal the mortal wounds. And then there's going to be games where you just roll 1s on the mortal wounds constantly. So there's just a lot of failure points along the way to getting this effect. And I think as Stormcast players, we can definitely attest to how strong and also how weak ping mortal wounds are. Like if you have Celestant Prime, his D3 Comet doing D3 mortal wounds to everything within an area is a good amount of damage, but it doesn't win you the game. It doesn't even make a significant impact on the game by itself. Like the reason D3 mortal wound pings are good is because you bring a lot of them. So if you had like Celestant Prime 2 Night Vexillors and like a Chain Lightning, suddenly everything's taking like 5 to 6 mortal wounds, and that's actually in the range where in one turn you can kill that support hero before they have a chance to heal up. So that's significant.
Okay, so I'll disagree with you a little on here, because here's the thing, right? We pay points for this lesson, Prime. We are paying 325 points for a guy to do pink mortal wounds. This is free. Like, Nighthaunt literally lose nothing. I mean, sure, we can discuss where they lose the other subfaction ability, but let's say you're not building Bladegeists, or you're not building tons of Chainrasps for Retreat and Charge. Having a free Celestin Prime Comet Strike Scepter, when comboed with things like your endless spells, which we discussed previously, like the Terminexus, Mortalis Terminexus, is really, really good with such a long range. You can really combo, like, chain some mortal wounds every turn.
Right.
Something like an average of 4 to 5. Yeah.
You can. And that's where I think a lot of the misconception about this is going to come in, is that a lot of people will see this and say, "Oh, it's free damage every turn. I don't have to change my list to take advantage of it." I don't think that's a correct way of viewing it. I think this actually requires changing your list, because if you're not laying on additional things on top of that D3 mortal wounds, then it's almost going to feel like nothing, right? Like, I remember when the Gits book came out in 2nd edition, people saw the moon was just going to do mortal wounds to something on the table every turn, and people were like, "Oh, this is so good." But after playing with it for a while, it's really not that impactful, because D3 mortal wounds isn't enough to kill something in one turn, and that was in 2nd edition when heroic actions didn't exist that could heal you. This is it's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with this ability, but I think in order to take advantage of it, you have to warp your list in a way that Nighthaunt don't want to lean into necessarily. Like, we have a sample list, I think, that shows what to get the most advantage out of this ability, and it's got things like endless spells, it's got the black coach, it's got Hexwraiths. Like, you pile on the mortal wounds, and I think it's okay. But I think the other subfactions are just better. I think what you give up isn't points, it isn't leader slots or anything, but it is a very useful subfaction ability. Like, Grieving Legion is really useful tactically, and Scarlet Doom, as we're about to talk about, I think is just going to do more damage for you.
That's fair. I can see a bit of a magic focus list that isn't so much trying to get charges off with cogs. Basically lean into some of the Nighthaunt endless spells, and then this ability, and then try to chain 4 to 5 mortal wounds on whatever they want each turn. And that doesn't have to be like a charging army. It can just be a mid-board, come to me and I'll deal mortal wounds to you army. So I could see it working. B's probably right. Like, I think the real builds will still revolve around Grieving Legion and what we're going to see next, but it's still a pretty fine ability. Like, having a free Comet Side Scepter, oh my god.
Oh, if it was literally the Comet Strike Scepter, that would be great. All units within 6 inches, but it's D3 plus 1, right? So
right.
Sometimes 2, sometimes 4. No control over whether or not it actually activates because it's on a 2-up, and then sometimes it does 1 mortal wound even when it does activate. You can't ignore that. You can't ignore that on average this is actually not a significant source of damage.
Yeah, fair.
Right. So yeah, I think B tier is okay. I would love to be proven wrong about this, because the Emerald Host is my, like, from a lore perspective, that's my favorite one, and I would really like it if it was better than what I think it's going to be.
Okay, yeah.
Looking at the Scarlet Doom, my eyes almost glazed over this one the first time I saw it. I really did not value it at all, but the more I looked at the book and the more I thought about it, the better it got. So what the ability is after a Bladegheist Revenant unit charges, you roll a dice equal to the size of that unit, and each 5-up causes a mortal wound. And my first impression was, oh, okay, so 10 guys, because they have 1 inch reach, so why would you ever reinforce them? 10 guys charging, going to do about 3, sometimes 4 mortal wounds on the charge. That's pretty good, right? That's okay. Like, maybe I'd rather have the Emerald Host just to deal mortal wounds more reliably there, because you don't have to charge. It works against shooting. But the more you think about that, and the more you look at the Nighthaunt book, Nighthaunt don't have reliable mortal wound output. And this ability gives you that. Gives you ogre charges basically on your one of your primary hammer units, which is
it's amazing.
Stupid amount of mortal wounds.
Yeah, for an army that can retreat and charge, it's amazing. If Nighthaunt did not have that ability, this ability would be extremely meh. But this utility means that they can keep doing it every turn. Just roll out 6 to 7 mortal wounds. Like, imagine having Annihilator charges on your opponents every turn.
Yeah,
like, it's crazy good.
So it's a very powerful ability, and it's so powerful that I think you might even lean into running like 50 to 60 Bladegeists. Because if you can just do 20 mortal wounds in the charge phase, you just delete something, right? You have 3 units charge into a screen, and the screen just dies, and you can pile in past it, which is something that Nighthaunt can't do otherwise. They just stop at the screen. They can't do anything about them.
Mm-hmm. What I also really like is like there's a couple ways to run this. You can run multiple squads of Bladegheist Revenants to sort of, I guess, counteract some like your opponent's like fire. Like for instance, if you want to layer defenses, like minimum squads of Bladegheist Revenants, or you can take one big squad, and the effect typically is the same. Although positioning 3 separate units might be difficult against one enemy unit.
Yeah, I really like the idea of 2 squads of 30. I think it's way too greedy, and it gives up a lot of board control, and you don't have any screening potential. But 2 units of 30, if you just have one model in the unit finish a charge, you can, within an inch, all the mortal wounds get piled into that unit like it's an Evocator Blast, which is really, really good.
Oh yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Now, there's downsides to this, obviously, right? Because you could just use Grimghast Reapers instead, and Grimghast Reapers have 2-inch reach. So if you're using larger size units, it kind of makes sense just to have the 2-inch reach so that you can fit more dudes in combat. And if you're running reinforced units of Bladegheist, then they are not getting all of their efficiency. So you have to find the right mix of the reinforced unit to do just a lot of punch mortal wounds all at once, and then smaller size units so that you can stack up more Wave of Terror and you can get more value out of their 1-inch range.
I don't think 30 might be the size for them. I think 20 might be the way to go.
Maybe 20 and another 20.
10-10.
Maybe
yeah,
30
20 10-10s.
Maybe 30 and 3 10s. Like that. It's hard to predict without playing a lot of games what the right number is. I think that's something players are going to figure out over time. But I don't think there's any doubt this ability is really powerful, especially in this army. This army, which struggles to deal the 40 wounds or whatever you need to kill a Gargant. This army really struggles to punch through Stormcast armor. This army
outside of spells and Olynder. Outside of spells and Olynder, this army struggles with mortal wounds. So having your regular battle line be able to do it, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I think you pretty much use the same units you would use in a Grieving Legion list here, except you swap all of the melee units out with Bladegheist Revenants. Maybe you run some Spirit Hosts to protect the heroes. You might run some Chainrasps just as a cheap disposable screen, but I think Bladegheist are so pivotal to this ability, and Bladegheist are just a fantastic unit. If you run like MSU and you take a lot of chip mortal wounds to shooting or damage or something, you can use Olynder's ability to start reviving, Spirit Torment to start reviving. I think, this is definitely like tournament worthy. This ability, I really like it. So yeah, I think Scarlet Doom is A tier. I definitely slept on it when I first saw the book, and I'm glad I noticed how good it was. And I think after playing it, everybody will see that too. It's very, very good. And lastly, the Quicksilver Dead, which is the one I was most excited about when we first saw the book, when you first told me what the ability was here. But I think when you first told me, you left out the crucial last 2 words of the ability, which is that it's by Harridans. So the ability is, ward rolls cannot be made for melee attacks made by Harridans. And at first I thought, wow, there's a subfaction of Nighthaunt that just ignore wards. Amazing. That's what I would play all the time, because almost every army has wards these days. And it's just ignoring them army-wide is really fantastic, but it's only on the Dreadcythe Harridans. And that makes this ability a lot worse. Definitely still playable, because it does give you the battle line Dreadcythe Harridans, which is nice for their charge ability to reduce wound rolls by 1. You can really lock opponents down. And there is, more armies are using ward rolls every single book, it seems. Nighthaunt, Daughters of Cain, Sylvaneth are getting a 5-up ward. I'm sure Skaven are going to pull them out too. And Harridans could come in as this nice little high-volume attacker. You stack up a bunch of rend through Wave of Terror, and then you just nuke something with Dreadscythe Harridans. Now, the problem is that I can't put the pieces together in my head for how a list like this is going to work until I start playing a bunch of games, because a part of this is that the same issue with Bladegheist Revenants having only 1-inch range, Dreadscythe Harridans also have 1-inch range. However, unlike the Scarlet Doom using Bladegheist, there's no real incentive to run a big block of 30. So do you just run squads of 10? I just can't figure out. Like, this one would need some playtesting for me to see what the list is going to look like.
I think you run squads of 10. Okay, so reinforcing these is like kind of pointless. Okay, yeah, because they only have 1-inch reach. I think you can run multiple squads of 10, particularly to stack Wave of Terror, and because even if you get about 10 to 12 models from the first rank, these models, Dreadscythe Harridans, have like 4 attacks each. So, with +1 to wound or +1 to hit with some Wave of Terror armor piercing, they can get on 3s and 3s, -1, 1 damage, which, when you have 4 attacks a model on your front 10 models, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it needs the right support, and once you start putting the pieces together, you start wondering, well, why am I not playing Scarlet Doom with Bladegheist instead? That's the problem I always run into when I try to make a list for this, that it looks so similar to the Scarlet Doom list, just with a arguably worse unit, which is really unfortunate.
Well, it's like, how much do you care about ignoring wards, really? That's
another part of it, is that ignoring a ward is really, really good. It can half somebody's effective health if they've got a 4-up ward and you're fighting them. Or sometimes it just does nothing, right? You could just be fighting against like Stormcast dragons that don't have a ward innately and they're not playing Hallowed Knights or something. Mm-hmm. You could be playing against Ironjaws who typically don't have a ward, and Harridans will just bounce off the Maw Crusher. You're not going to get anything done there.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. So against Nurgle, this ability is amazing because you drown them in buckets of dice and they can't do their 5-up disgustingly resilient. And again, something like the Stormcast Annihilators, it does nothing. So yeah, this would be like once again, if AOS had like a sideboard mechanic, sure, this would be your second list. Your first list would probably just be damage up front.
Yeah, if you could make a list and then pick your subfaction after, there might be some interesting play there. You could, pick a mix of Harridans and Bladegheist and Grimghast and then pick the subfaction based on what you're trying to do. But the fact that you have to pick it as part of list building makes it really hard to ever use this in like a regular tournament setting.
I can see someone making a meta call though, seeing a bunch of ward armies in the top 8 and be like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna.
I want to see it. Like this is not a bad ability by any means, and Dreadscythe Harridans are not a bad unit. It's not obviously as good as the Scarlet Doom. That doesn't make it bad, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm giving it a C tier here. It could be worse than this. I hope it's better. Yeah. That's my final thoughts on that. Taking a look at the command traits for Nighthaunt, we'll just go over briefly what they do and then kind of give our thoughts on them. The first one here is Lingering Spirit. It is a 4-up ward against mortal wounds, which I would love this effect in literally every other army. Every single other army in the game, I would pick this.
I'd like it on a Star Drake.
I would love it. I would love it with Ironjaws. I would love it with Daughters of Cain. I would love it with Nurgle. It's fantastic. The problem is that Nighthaunt already have this just by bringing Spirit Host. So and you're gonna bring the Spirit Host anyway because this is just against mortal wounds. So against regular shooting, you're still gonna want the Spirit Hosts, and the Spirit Hosts protect every hero potentially if you position correctly. So yeah, how often are you actually gonna get advantage of this?
No, it's not very good. Like when you have a 6-up ward that you can always just discorporate also, like again with a 5-up ward, like oftentimes that's going to be good enough. And plus, like you said, you have Spirit Host, so it's not worth the command trait slot.
Yeah, agreed there. And that's saying something because as you guys are going to see from this, there's not a lot of good command traits. This one is certainly not worth it. The next one is Terrifying Entity. Enemy units are terrified if they are within 6 inches rather than 3 inches. And I really like this ability, but I can't see myself ever picking it. Because I
guess it's good for anti-shooting -1 damage.
No, because the Cruciator, let's say you teleport him in from reserves, he has to be more than 9, so he's not activating this on his own. So you still need a unit to charge in.
Right, no. I'm saying, okay, so this can go on some other hero. Your Cruciator only has a 12-inch aura for friendly Nighthaunt units. And if that other hero with this command trait is within 6 of like a 2 damage shooting unit, that damage will still go down to 1. Because they're terrified, and they're shooting a 2 damage unit into your Nighthaunt units wholly within 12 inches of a Cruciator aura. So it's one way to reduce ranged shooting damage.
Only if you have like a really fast hero. So I guess you could put this on like a Knight of Shrouds. He could run 6, so that's an 18-inch move, I believe, and then he's within 6 with 22 threat aura on that, assuming you can finish a move more than 3 inches. That's always the problem, right? Is like your enemies can still just screen you out because you can't finish a move within 3 inches, and so getting within 6 is really difficult.
Sure.
Also, really quickly going to double check the Cruciator's effect. No, I think you have it wrong. So how the Cruciator works is if this unit, so if the Cruciator is within 12 inches of a Terrified unit, then it buffs your guys.
Okay.
It doesn't reduce the Terrified unit.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
so all you need to do is have a Terrified unit within 12 inches, and then the Cruciator's effect activates.
Ah, never mind then.
Yeah. So I would really like this to be useful. I wish it was 10 inches. That way you could just deep strike a hero in range.
Is it to shut off Inspiring Presence within 6? I think that might just be it.
Maybe it could be to increase. But the thing is, if you're when are you within 6? But like when are you within 3 but not within 6? You know what I mean? Like just that extra 3 inches is not really impactful. If it went up to 10, that would be great because then you could use it from reserve. But just 6 is just
yeah. It's very niche.
What's that breakpoint doing for you exactly? You fail a charge and you still terrify. I guess that's the niche for this thing.
Yeah, I suppose.
Well, you can't actually with Night Haunt because the Midnight Tome exists, so you're never going to fail a 3-inch charge with this army. Next one.
We'll talk about that.
Yes, we will. Next one here is Ruler of the Spectral Hosts, which is probably one of the worst revive abilities they've ever put in the game. I think it's up there with like the Stormcast reviving the Redeemer units in 2nd edition. It's just not very... As in a vacuum, it's just not a very good ability because it's once per battle on a 4-up. You revive a summonable keyword unit with half of its original models, and this I believe is a new unit, so it's not it's not the previous unit. It's a new unit that you're creating, and the unit must be set up wholly within 12 inches of the general and 3 inches from enemy units, which is very interesting.
Wow, really makes you think what they were thinking with Call for Aid.
Yeah. Now there's a lot of downsides with this, right? Because you have to wait for your unit to be dead, your general has to be alive, and there's a very specific timing window, I believe it's at the end of the movement phase, that you have to use this. And you have to roll a 4-up. And it's only once per game, so if you fail that 4-up, it's just not happening. So there's just a lot of things that have to go right in order to get any value from this. But I think the times when you revive 15 Grimghast or 15 Bladegheist, that it's going to win you the game.
Mm-hmm.
And
You're effectively getting back like 300 points.
Not only that, they're in combat right away because it's more than 3 inches from enemy units.
Mm-hmm.
So if your general is a wizard who takes the teleporting spell, you can, try to fish for this and try to get that huge charge and swing the game. So this has a lot of value, and given how hard it is to kill generals for Night Haunt because of the Spirit Hosts, I think this is it's not bad at all. It's actually quite good.
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that all these limitations exist on it came through playtesting, and they're like, "Oh, we can't just have this happen. Let's make it a 4-up."
I mean, yeah, because look at Soul by Gravelord. They just like bring back 30 zombies or whenever they want to, and it's busted. So it's they were like, yeah, make it a little fair.
Yeah, especially because Night Haunt are still reviving with the Guardian. They're still reviving with the Spirit Torment. And with Olynder, there's other ways to revive in this army. And then this one on top of that, if you manage to wipe the unit out, could just be backbreaking. Like because killing 30 ghosts is not trivial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think because all the other command traits are pretty bad, this one will see a lot of play. Let's take a look at some other ones. Hatred of the Living. The general can reroll hit and wound rolls against anything that does not have the death keyword. And that's very strong in any other army. Because rerolling hit and wound is very good. And you can even combine it with like an offensive artifact, and the hero can suddenly start dealing a lot of damage. Now, I don't know if you want offensive heroes in Night Haunt necessarily, and the ones that you do want being offensive can't take command traits like Olynder and Kurdoss. They just can't take this. So when would you want to give this to a Guardian of Souls or a Knight of Shrouds or maybe like a Lord Executioner? I could see that happening. But then there's always the limitation that it just doesn't work against any death army. So if there's a lot of Soul Blight or Flesh Eaters or just Nagash in your area, this just doesn't do anything.
Yep. I would never take this one. Like, I used to take this artifact. There's a similar one in Ossiarch Bone Reapers. It gives you a +1 to wound against non-death units. But, death is, like, fairly common at any tournament, so, like, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. Even if you were guaranteed to never fight against death in your 5 rounds at a tournament, I don't think I'd pick it either.
I don't know, I might. Like, rerolls are pretty good. Wait, hold on. Is it for units or just the general?
Just the general.
Oh, then no. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
I'm
if
not
it was the
fighting with
unit, oh
Nighthawk.
baby. Oh, that's
Yeah,
a different story.
Yeah, I'm not fighting with Nighthawk units. It's my Grimghast or my Bladegheist doing the work, so probably never.
Yeah. Next up here, Spiteful Spirit. At the end of the combat phase, you roll dice equal to the general's wound characteristic, and each 4-up deals a mortal wound to each enemy unit within 6 inches. Now that sounds like a lot of mortal wounds, and it could be, but most Nighthaunt heroes that can take this command trait, I think, are 5 or 6 wounds. So you're rolling, 5 or 6 dice. Each 4-up deals a mortal wound to each enemy unit within 6, which means you're engaged in a pretty deep combat. Hopefully you can tag a lot of units with this. But it only activates if your general suffered any wounds in that combat phase, which means you are in range to be hit by melee attacks, and enough melee attacks to get through your 4-up Ethereal and your 6-up Ward, and possibly a 5-up Ward, depending on how defensive you want to be. But not enough to kill you, because obviously if the general is slain, then this does nothing. So you could do a lot of mortal wounds in an area with this, but given how combats work in Age of Sigmar, you're pretty likely to just die before that happens. Like, stuff is going to hit you, or have other options. Like, if your opponent knows that what this ability is and what it could potentially do, they're just going to target other things in range. Like, you have to kind of force a scenario where your general gets hit, and if you're doing that, you also want to make sure you have Spirit Hosts nearby, because you don't want your general to die. But the Spirit Host might fail a charge if you're being aggressive. Like, there's just a lot of things you have to put together in order to get value from this. And yeah, I think it's really difficult. It seems really good, but I think in practice it's really not.
I mean, it's once we see the artifact section, we might see a way to make this command trait viable, but given that it's taking up a command trait slot, which you only get one of, there's probably better things you could be doing.
If this was an artifact, I would like it a lot more, because you could take Warlord very easily with this army and get extra artifacts. But the fact that it's your command trait and you only get one, yeah, that's not worth losing over a 4-up revive once per game, I think.
Yeah, that's rough.
Cloaked in Shadow. The general can't be picked as the target of shooting or combat by more than one unit per phase. So, if you could take this with Spiteful Spirit, I'd be on board, because you could force a combat, get hit by a weak thing, do a bunch of mortal wounds in return, and then just be immune to melee attacks for the rest of the phase. That would be really cool. This effect is very good. It's very good against armies like Idoneth Deepkin, which want to fight and shoot with multiple units and do focused fire. But some armies, like Stormcast, they just have the one unit shooting. They're just going to kill you with 15 crossbow adjudicators. They're not going to split their shots. They're not going to try to do anything fancy. So when do you take this? That's the question.
I don't know. I don't see it. Most people like taking big shooting units so they can put all their force multipliers onto them. So this is like you said, only maybe like Idoneth Deepkin. I can't really see. Maybe like if you make a really tanky like combat hero and you send it out so it gets surrounded by multiple units fighting it, maybe that's when you don't do it. But then, Nighthaunt heroes aren't particularly tanky. Like, they're all like 7 wounds, and it was a 5 of war, and we'll say, okay, it's 50% more health, so like, let's say 11 wounds. Yeah, they're just gonna die to a lot of the things out there.
Yeah, they're not particularly durable. The exceptions are, of course, Kurdoss and Olynder, but they can't take it, unfortunately. So
yeah, so it's irrelevant for them.
It's a good effect. It's just not good on any of the Nighthaunt support heroes, and it doesn't make any of the non-support heroes worth using. Like, I wouldn't take a Knight of Shrouds to give him any of these, right? Like, that doesn't make it worth bringing a really bad hero just to take advantage of a really good ability. It also does nothing against abilities and spells. So if you're getting hit by Kairos and has 6 mortal wounds, like, this does nothing. I'm sorry, you're still going to die. And then the universal command traits, which are not bad, surprisingly. Battle Lust lets you reroll run and charge rolls with the general. Rerolling run is not a big deal. Maybe turn 1 if you're moving up into the middle of the board. It might give you a couple inches. But rerolling charge is very useful in this army, because you want to charge as many things as possible, and you can
never want to fail them.
And you can only reroll 1 of them or 2 if you have a Dreadblade Harrow. So just having a reroll charge on a general that comes out of reserve is not bad at all. And if you're playing some kind of like Alpha Strike list where you deploy all of your ghosts right up on the enemy's face right away, having an extra reroll for another ghost could be the wave of terror you need to get that 8 up and get an extra rend or strike last effect or something like that. So it's really not a bad thing to bring to a list. It gives your support hero a little more utility, which is always good. Skilled Leader generates a command point at the start of your turn on a 5-up, and that's okay because Nighthaunt.
Nice. It's like another heroic leadership. It's fine.
Yeah, Nighthaunt use a lot of command points. So and sometimes you don't want to use heroic leadership. Sometimes you can use this and then do your heroic leadership. Sometimes you can do this and heal in the same turn. You do have to be on the battlefield to use it, so you can't just keep a hero in reserve and keep generating command points that way. But sometimes generating a command point is better than a lot of the other command trade options. High Priest, obviously F, no priests. Heroic stature, +1 to wound. It's a lot more interesting to have +1 to wound in a Nighthaunt army because they are so durable. Like adding 1 wound is effectively adding 2 because everything is a 4-up ethereal, and then a 6-up ward is like another 20% on top of that. So it's interesting to boost their wounds, but +1 is just not enough. I don't think I'd ever take this.
Yeah, no, I don't think I would either.
And then looking at, I think my go-to pick will probably be Master of Magic, which allows the general to reroll casting, unbinding, and dispel rolls. So you can make any hero your general, give them Master of Magic and an Arcane Tome, and then that hero is reliably casting really good spells, because the Nighthaunt spells are excellent. And there's also really good value in unbind rolls and dispel rolls. Dispel, not so much, not many people are playing in the spells, but rerolling unbinds, I think, will be clutch for this army, because there's going to be a lot of anti-horde spells that will just take huge chunks out of your 30 blocks, and if you're running MSU, some kind of AoE spell could do a lot of damage to you. So being able to reroll and unbind could be the difference between winning and losing a game, and that's just nice utility on top of making your spells more reliable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think
Master Magic is, like for an army that has an excellent spell suite, is always going to be a good trade.
Yeah, and the only thing stopping it from being S tier in my mind is that the Midnight Tome exists, which guarantees a cast, and since the Nighthaunt wizards are 1-spell wizards, that's a whole turn where you're not getting pretty much any value from Master Magic. So that's the only reason I wouldn't do it. If you're playing a very aggressive upfront list, you don't need it, because you're going to automatically cast the cogs. You don't need to reroll it.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see from all these, the ones that stand out in my mind are going to be Master of Magic and Ruler of the Spectral Host. I think I might also take Battle Lust depending on the list as well, or even Skilled Leader if you're just looking for a general, take all coppers, no specific strategy kind of approach. Looking at the artifacts now, any Nighthaunt hero can take these ones here. The first one is Cloak of the Waxing Moon. Enemy melee weapons have -1 attack when targeting the bearer, which is good. That's a really good effect. Krondys and Karazai have this effect, and they cost 600 points each, and I think part of it is because of this effect. The problem is, why are your support heroes getting into combat? Right? That's like if you're...
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense, yeah.
If it was enemy melee weapons have -1 attack while they're within 3 inches of the bearer, that would be great, because it would be a way to keep your other ghosts alive, but in general, you don't want to put your heroes aggressively in combat, and you don't want them getting hit by melee weapons. In a perfect Nighthaunt game, your heroes never get hit by melee attacks. Now, there is value in, things aren't perfect always, but I'd rather play into something than to have a backup plan if things are going horribly wrong.
Yeah, that's fair.
Pendant of the Fell Wind. Enemy units have -1 to wound rolls while they're within 3 inches of the bearer. This is, like we were talking about earlier, if this affected other units within range, it would be better. However, this particular effect is not the best one to have because Nighthaunt have access to Dreadscythe Harridans that give -1 wound. They have access to the Lord Executioner, which gives them -1 to wound, and they have access to Shade Mist, which gives enemies a -1 to wound. So you have to get within 3 inches, which isn't always going to happen. You don't always want to have to charge in your hero, and you're not always playing defensively necessarily. It is really good in like a castle setup. Your opponent charges you before you have a chance to cast Shade Mist or charge with your Harridans, and that's not a bad effect at all. So
no,
I like this one.
I mean, it lets you, it opens up a Shade Mist slot. Like if you want to use some other spell other than Shade Mist, sure, this could work in a sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's really not bad at all. Depends on your list and what you're expecting to play against. I wouldn't ignore this one. Maybe C tier might be too low for it. Maybe it should have been B. But C is, situationally useful, so that's what we're going to go with. And Midnight Tome, I think, is the best artifact in the book. Once per battle, if this user is a wizard, they can automatically cast an endless spell, and it cannot be unbound. So the only wizard in the book that isn't a unique character is the Guardian of Souls. So he's the only one that can take this, because you can't give a hero 2 artifacts, so you can't do Arcane Tome and Midnight Tome. But this is an incredibly powerful effect. Consistency is king in Age of Sigmar. This is spell in a bottle for Night Haunt, which is amazing. You can automatically cast the Chronomantic Cogs to give your army a +1 to charge. You can automatically cast the Life Swarm to heal up and revive a bunch of models. You can auto-cast the Terminexus to deal a bunch of mortal wounds in an area. There's so many possibilities for what this book can do. Most of the time, even if it just auto-casts your Chronomantic Cogs, that's worth an artifact slot every single time, because Cogs are so crucial to how this army is functioning.
Yeah, I mean, this is all... Caradhran Overlords has been doing spell in a bottle for like 2 years, and it's like one of the best things they do on the board. Being able to just auto-cast an endless spell, I mean, yeah, sure, you're not going to cast Torp Lightning Vortex, but as we discussed, the Night Haunt endless spells are extremely good, and Cogs just increases your charge to where you can be 9 inches away and do 8-inch charges with the opponent on your dice, and that's phenomenal. So yeah, this is S tier.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, like you need a good reason not to use this and include an endless spell in your list.
Mm-hmm.
Especially given how good the Guardian of Souls is. I think every list has a Guardian of Souls, so that's going to just be a natural combo.
Yeah, I mean, not just like endless spells are just good. Like this army doesn't have a lot of mortal wounds, so having endless spells do that part for you. Yeah, that's excellent.
Next up, the Shadow's Edge. Hit rolls of 6 cause D3 mortal wounds instead of normal damage. I don't think you ever take this. It's like Stormcast heroes. You bring them for their support, not for their damage. So why would you have a marginal increase to their damage? It doesn't make any sense.
Nope.
Reaper of Sorrows, again, F tier. Before attacking, you can roll 2d6, and if you roll higher than the target's bravery, you gain Rend 4. So this might be hilarious with like a Cairn Wraith, and that's about it. Because Rend 4, if you remember, also scales, that stacks with the Wave of Terror, so you could have like -6 to enemy save rolls, and at that point you're like, it doesn't even matter. Like.
I mean, I guess like if Kragnos is like in every list you're fighting, sure.
But you still have to roll higher than his bravery.
Yeah, it's like a bravery 8 or something. Yeah, like roll, like we know, like we've talked about this, like Anvils of the Helden Hammer with that stupid roll over the bravery crap. Like it's just not good. Like
yeah, this is not a good offensive artifact. Yeah, not good. F tier. The Slitter. Before you pile in, you can pick an enemy unit within 1 inch, and if you roll higher than its wound characteristic, you slay that model instantly. I really like effects that slay models instantly because you can kill champions to disable commands, you can kill banners to mess with their bravery and battle shock, you can kill stuff to break cohesion. So I really don't mind this, but you have to put it on a
it's
support.
Not equal to, right? It's over.
Yeah, it's greater. So you could, in theory, kill 5 wound support heroes if you get lucky. You could kill like a Croxigor or an Ogre or like a Retributor, just roll a 4 up and you kill 1. I don't, that's fine utility for a support hero. It doesn't matter what the support hero's combat profile is. It does take an activation, so if your opponent has gone first, they might just kill you, and you don't want to pile in first with your support hero, you want to pile in with your proper units. So it's difficult to use it properly without losing your heroes. So, and it's before you pile in, so you can't even sit behind a unit of dudes and then pile into range. So yeah, you have to be an aggressive hero, and that just doesn't fit with what Night Haunt are trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Light Shard of the Harvest Moon. Once per battle, at the start of the combat phase, you can use this artifact, and it adds 1 to melee attacks for all Night Haunt units wholly within 12 inches. Night Haunt are not a high damage army. This is somewhere between a 50% to 75% or 25% damage increase, or 50 to 30, 33 to 50%, depending on how many attacks you have. The point is, you get an extra 10 attacks with your Bladegheist on that turn. You get an extra 20 attacks with your Grimghast that turn. And it's when you need it. You can do it after you see how Wave of Terror. So like if you roll a bunch of charges and they're all like 4s and you don't get any Wave of Terror, you think, maybe I won't use this artifact yet. I'll save it for next turn when I retreat and charge and try to get like that Rend 4 going. So this is great. This is really, really, really strong on this army.
Oh yeah, and like it's basically even better than Unleash Thy Hatred because that's a command ability, so you can't stack it with all-out attack. This one you can, so it's really, really good.
Yep, and it works on every unit wholly within 12 inches of the bearer, so you just teleport them into range. You don't have to do anything with that hero. It could be put on a Tomb Banshee, and then you just drop her into play with Phantasms. Very powerful artifact.
Auric Runefathers have this, and it's a really good ability.
Yeah. Next up, the Beacon of Nagashazar. Once per battle, you can return one model to each friendly Nighthaunt summonable unit. There's no range restriction on this. It's table-wide. The problem is that reviving one model from each unit once per game isn't very good.
No, I wouldn't spend it on, just use Rally. Don't bother with the artifact.
Yeah, if you're running lots of small units to take advantage of this, then they're probably going to get wiped out before you can revive them.
Yeah, you should be running Olynder.
Olynder, yeah. Just use her instead if you want this kind of effect. You could stack them. You could use both, but sometimes you roll a 5 on the d6, and then you don't need to heal more than that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Soulfire Ring. At the end of combat, if this hero slays any models, you can heal d6. This kind of fits in with the Spiteful Spirit thing that we were talking about with the command traits, because you can take some damage and then heal up d6. The problem is this requires slaying models. It also requires slaying them with the melee weapon that you used, and I just don't see that combo working. I think Nighthaunt support heroes want to be supporting. They don't want to be fighting. Defensively, you don't want to put them on the front lines. Offensively, if they make the charge, that's great, but you can't reliably do that because they're kind of slow.
So the only time this is viable, like that, the command trait and the Soulfire Ring that we're talking about, is when we put it on a hero that we graded not too kindly, which is the Knight of Shrouds. He's the fastest hero they've got. He's got 7 wounds. He's got a 4-up save. He can fight decently. He's got a free
he's only got 6 wounds for the record.
No, sorry, even the one on Steed.
Yeah, the one on foot's 5 and the one on Steed is 6.
Okay, so I guess he's probably the best candidate for this. And I have seen that play to some effect. You charge him or you deploy with a unit of Grimghasts. You sort of wait till turn 2 or turn 3 to start taking advantage of that combo. And it can do some work because ideally when you engage such a hero in combat, your opponent should be too busy trying to deal with a large amount of ghosts that they're sending your way. But yeah, if your opponent's aware of this, then they can do things to stay away from it. They can try and snipe the hero out, especially once the hero moves out of range of the Spirit Host hero protection or whatever. So it's not as good, but it is it's a fun and potent combo. It can put in work against the right matchups.
Yeah, I don't think it's worth running over other things, right? In terms of opportunity cost, but that doesn't mean it's unplayably bad. The problem with this artifact in that combo is it requires slaying a model. The other one just requires you take damage, which is easier to do, frankly, with Nighthaunt, because even if you were to put it on something with 5 attacks and 2 damage, you're still not guaranteed that unit is going to do the damage you need. Because you have to slay models, right? So this does nothing against Gargants, right? It's just not going to do anything. And in other matchups, you're just going to kill everything with your ghosts. So the hero specifically has to slay things and take damage, and I'd rather just not bring this part of that combo. I'd rather just have the Spiteful Spirit if I'm going to bring it. I don't think I would include this ring.
That's fair.
Covetous Familiar. Enemy units that finish a pile-in within 3 inches suffer a mortal wound. Again, in theory, it can do a lot of mortal wounds if you get charged by a lot of stuff. There's no dice rolling on this. It just happens automatically. But 1 mortal wound isn't going to do anything. It's irrelevant damage.
Yeah, no.
Unless there was some reason you wanted to specifically deal damage in the enemy charge phase to activate some kind of effect, and I don't think there is. So
nope.
Yeah. Next up, the Witchlight Lantern. Once per battle, this wizard can cast another spell from the lore of the Underworlds. It can only cast a spell that it doesn't know, which means you could, with 1 wizard, cast Seal of Shyish and Shade Mist in a single turn. But this is only once per battle. Why don't you just take an Arcane Tome on a hero, and then you can cast 2 spells every turn?
Yeah, if Arcane Tome wasn't there, sure, but no. Otherwise, no.
This is specifically for a situation where you want a single hero to cast Seal of Shyish and Shade Mist in 1 turn. Because if you're ever casting any other spell, then there's no reason to have this. Maybe Arcane Spectral Tome. Tether and then Seal, I don't know. It's just not...
Yeah, no, Arcane Tome exists. No point in this.
Yeah, Nighthaunt have a lot of great support heroes. You're going to be using a lot of heroes. Arcane Tome is better. It lets you cast a spell every turn.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, Universal Artifacts, Amulet of Destiny, obviously terrible. It's 6 up board. You already have a 6 up board. No reason. Vial of Manticore Venom, +1 to wound. No, you don't want beat stick heroes, and also the Guardian of Souls gives +1 to wound anyway, so there's no reason to ever take this. Arcane Tome is very good, A tier. Not as good as the Midnight Tome, I think, but turning any of your support heroes into a wizard.
I mean, you're running Warlords. Nighthaunt isn't running battle regiments.
You can. I think you can. I think there's some builds that can make it
but
work.
your entire tankiness comes from the Scorpion being so good. And if the Scorpion goes away for any reason due to a 3-up roar, well, I don't know. I don't think Nighthaunt realistically ever go. Plus, their cast of heroes is so good that you almost always want to take at least 4 to 6.
Yeah.
At least 4, maybe 6. But so that's an easy double Warlord or double Command Entourage, whatever.
Agreed. Yeah, this one often will find its way into lists. But if you had to choose just one artifact for some reason, I think the Midnight Tome wins.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Because you'll have at least one or two wizards in that lineup of 4 to 5 heroes, and then you might as well be using Midnight Tome at that point.
This one's really fun in particular on a Dreadblade Harrow, because the Harrow can metamorphosis himself, become a monster, and then get access to rampages. So then he can just teleport himself into range of a terrain feature, out of range of enemies, but within range to use a rampage on the terrain feature, and smash it to rubble. Just automatically it's gone. And then next turn teleport himself back. So a lot of neat tricks you can do with it, and as we're about to talk about, the Nighthaunt spell lore is very good. Seed of Rebirth is not good. Rerolling the healing from Heroic Recovery. Nighthaunt do like using Heroic Recovery to deal with chip mortal wounds, but this is bad. Sometimes gaining 1 healing on a heroic action you might use is not a good artifact use, and sometimes it makes it worse. Sometimes you can go from 2 to 1. So
if Nighthaunt had any large wound heroes that could take this artifact, like a 14 wound Nighthaunt monster that could take it, maybe. But
I might use it if the Black Coach was a hero.
Yeah, it's not.
Now healing on Nighthaunt is very good because they have such high effective health. Between the 4-up Ethereal and the 5-up or 6-up Ward, healing goes a long way for Nighthaunt, but I just wouldn't take this artifact to boost it. I would rather use an Emerald Life Swarm or just use Heroic Recovery, and whatever rolls is what you get.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the spell lore. So Nagash and any Nighthaunt hero wizard can take this, including unique units, and there are a couple of unique wizards in this army. The first one here is Soul Cage. It casts on a 7+, a range of 12 inches. You can pick an enemy unit, and they have Strike Last until the end of the turn. Not until your next hero phase, end of the turn. So as soon as your opponent's turn starts, it goes away. And 12-inch range is difficult for this spell. And it has a high cast, 7-up. That's not reliable with a +0 to cast like you'll usually have in this army. Not feeling this one. Also note that anytime you roll a 10+ on Wave of Terror, you can just get the Strike Last effect. So it's hard to think of scenarios where you would want this to happen. I think it's specifically when you're using Nagash, right? You have less units on the table, but in that case, you don't need a ranking on this because Nagash just learns all of them, so you don't have to worry about this. Spirit Drain, casting on a 7-up. A lot of 7-up spells in this army. Range 18 inches, which is better than the 12. You pick an enemy unit, and you roll dice equal to the size of the unit, and each 6 is a mortal wound. So it's your typical anti-horde spell. It's on the weaker side of anti-horde spells. There's a lot of armies that have much better ones. Some of them are on 5, some of them are on 4s. And this is not great. But Nighthaunt are kind of strapped for mortal wound sources. And it could... I don't think I'd ever pick it. That's the issue. Like the spells we're about to show on the next slide are so much better. So Nagash will cast this, but the other heroes won't.
Yeah, that's fair to say, I think.
Next up, Lifestealer. Casts on a 7+, at range 12 inches. Pick an enemy, deal D3 mortal wounds, and you heal that much from your hero. Again, this is not one that I would ever cast with a regular wizard. Nagash will cast it at some point. And here we go, the actual good spells. First up, Seal of Shyish. Casts on a 5, which is easy. Range of 12 inches, and you give a friendly unit, a Nighthaunt unit, a ward of 5+, and it lasts until your next hero phase. So, this could be the thing you need in order to get around roars, because you just always have a 5-up. You don't care if you get hit by a roar, because it disables Discorporate. Doesn't matter, you've already got the 5-up board. It does also save you a lot of command points, so that's great. Just all-around excellent spell. I would always be casting this every single turn.
It's really, really good, yeah. Amulet of Destiny on spell demand. Pretty good.
It's any Nighthaunt unit too, which is amazing. Except Nagash, obviously doesn't have the Nighthaunt keyword, so he can't get a ward, sorry. Shade Mist, a cast on a 6, another relatively easy cast. Range of 12 inches, and enemies have -1 to wound a friendly Nighthaunt unit. So you pick a Nighthaunt unit, and enemies have -1 to wound against it, which is amazing. Like, that perfectly fits into what Nighthaunt are trying to do. They're trying to be this like attrition-style army that grinds out your opponent. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. It's like... Honestly, I wish Thundershock was more like this, but Thundershock is more offensive. This is like more defensive, but it's pretty good.
Yeah. Now, the only downside of this ability, besides the cast value of 6, and sometimes you fail it, which is why I suggest taking Master of Magic in this army. But the downside of this ability is that it's a spell that you want to have up all the time, and if you're playing a very aggressive build, the unit that you want it on may not necessarily be on the table in your first turn. So you kind of have to plan ahead. Like, if you're getting very aggressive and you're teleporting units forward first turn from reserve, they won't have the seal or shade mist, and they can be focused down and they could die. So you have to kind of take that consideration into mind. And lastly, the Spectral Tether, which I kind of, the more I thought about it, the more I like it. It's a very easy cast on a 4+, which means Nagash auto casts it, and it teleports the caster. It's basically translocation for Nighthaunt. And you can teleport your support hero into range anywhere. There's an empty objective, bam, it's mine. I have to get in range for an aura, bam, I'm there. I need to get out of combat, bam, it's there, right? Like, if for some reason you can't use a retreat ability, Olynder can use this to teleport herself in range for lifting the veil or shooting attack, and the Mortarch of Grief ability, which disables commands. The Guardian of Souls has his aura and his other spell, so if you find some way to cast 2 spells with this wizard, like an Arcane Tome, then you can teleport him around and cast other spells. Or any hero can just teleport themselves around, because if you need a Cruciator to be in range of the Terrify and spread that aura, bam, you got it with the Arcane Tome on this guy and a cast of 4 up. Very reliable.
Yeah, it's oh man, it's really, really good.
Yeah, the only reason I wouldn't pick it is because the other 2 spells are so important. But it kind of gives me a reason to think maybe I would take a spell enhancement in this army, just to give like Olynder and the Guardian an extra spell so that they both know Seal and Tether, or Shade Mist and Tether.
I mean, if you're taking Olynder, Guardian of Souls, and something else, so you've got all 3, right? Olynder knows 1 spell, Guardian can know another, and then you can take Arcane Tome on something else and have them know the last spell.
The problem is that you end up giving up either the Arcane Tome or the Light Shard, so you're hitting serious opportunity cost there.
I don't know. Like, if I'm an army with 2 enhancements because I'm running double Warlord or like double Command Entourage, I think it's fine. I think I'll go for it. I think I'll have the whole spell suite available to me in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. I think personally I'd go with Midnight Tome first, then Arcane Tome, and then Light Shard, and that's my double enhancement right there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Spectral Tether is great. Nagash loves it. Every other hero loves it. It's nice. Also plays into the like teleport forward strategy that Nighthaunt can play into. Taking a quick look at some allies, Nighthaunt can only take allied units from the Soulblight Gravelords, which there's not a lot in that book you really want to bring, because any kind of infantry, your ghosts are better without the specific keywords and synergies from the Soulblight book. They're not worth using. Really, the only one that stood out was the Terrorgeist. James, are you familiar with what the Terrorgeist does?
Not off the top of my head.
So just like on its own, without the Vampire Lord or anything riding on it, it's just a fast flying monster. It can deal some mortal wounds and melee, and it has monster, which the rest of the Nighthaunt book doesn't have. So if you just need some extra victory points, you need something fast, you need something that can spike mortal wounds, it kind of fits all of these things that Nighthaunt are lacking. Now, obviously, it doesn't have the Nighthaunt keyword, so I don't know if it's ever going to be worth its points, but it is worth considering, filling a lot of gaps in a list.
Yeah, an easy point for smashing terrain and roar. It's pretty good.
I'm not sure what the point differential would be, but I know Prince Vordry has like his own version of all-out attack. It's a +1 to attack or a +1 to hit and wound, so I think I prefer him over Terrorgeist.
I could see that. Yeah, just some kind of fast, punchy monster. I think that's about the only thing you would ever want from Soul Blight. Maybe, yeah, I don't think anything else is really worthwhile. You just don't get
Maybe the
value.
corpse cards, but for like if you like we said about Spectral Feather and Shade Mist, like if you just wanted an aura of -1 to wound, the corpse card could be good.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a little too slow to keep up with the rest of the Nighthaunt army, especially if you're doing any kind of teleporting tricks.
Well, the other one is +1 to cast, so that one could be pretty good.
Does that work on Nighthaunt heroes?
It just says friendly heroes, I think. Friendly wizards.
Oh, that's pretty good then. Yeah, +1 to cast is okay.
I think it's called the Unholy Lodestone. Oh no, it's sold by Glaivewraith Lord Wizards. Never mind.
There we go. Yeah, if it was +1 cast all wizards, I'd consider it.
Yeah.
I think the other quote unquote ally would be the Kronspine Incarnate. Now we do have a video coming about this soon, but basically it's a heavy hitter. It's fast. It's got monster. It takes a minimum of 2 turns to kill for your opponent. It gives you +1 to cast on your hero, and I think the most important part of this for Nighthaunt, in addition to the monster keyword, you can reroll charge rolls in an aura around it, which is really, really big for this army.
Amazing. Now, this is a bit of a non-bow too, because you can't retreat, which was what Nighthaunt wanted to do.
Yeah, so you got to be real careful when you use this thing, because if you're within range to get the reroll charge, then you're also in range to get affected by the no retreat ability. Now you can play around that because you could deploy in such a way that you have one model out of range, because both of these auras are wholly within. So if you have one model out of range at deployment, you're not penalized by your own ability. And then when you move forward as an army, you move into range and you try to get those rerollable charges. So I think you can play around it enough that I would still run this in a Nighthaunt list.
Yeah, it's also it's just a fun model. Yeah.
Yeah, fun for you, not your opponent.
No, fair.
And let's talk about the neutral endless spells, because Nighthaunt have access to the Midnight Tome. They can auto-cast any of these, and when you are automatically casting a spell, suddenly they look a lot better. When you just take the dice roll out of the equation, really, really good. +1 to charge with the cogs is fantastic. It doesn't increase your wave of terror rolls because that's the unmodified charge roll, but making a charge is really good. Never failing a 3-inch charge is really good.
I mean, let's say you deep strike and you make an 8-inch charge. That's still phenomenal. That's you automatically at -1 or -2 rend for whatever that completed that charge, and you just completed a 9-inch deep strike charge, which is the dream,
Mm-hmm.
And if you Stormcast players love doing that.
And if you made at least an 8-inch charge, you're going to get the -1 save wave of terror, which is really good.
Yeah, that's what I meant by like increases the rend. Like I say, increases the rend on your weapons technically,
right.
But yeah.
Yeah. So this, I think the cogs being auto cast makes that deep strike alpha strike style work. It's not really an alpha strike in the sense you're trying to kill your opponent. It's like an alpha tar pit. You're trying to just pin your opponent in their deployment, and I think having the cogs makes that work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to go for a more grindy style where you're reviving stuff every single turn, the Spirit Torment, and with Olynder and things like that, you can add in an Emerald Life Swarm. And the thing about reviving is it gets better and more effective the more of it you have. Like as long as your opponent's killing your stuff, right? If they're not killing the models, then Life Swarm's not reviving anything, it's not worth it. But typically you'll lose, 10 to 15 ghosts per turn. And if you do it right, they'll survive, right? If you stack up all your defensives, you'll still lose ghosts. And just having access to the Emerald Life Swarm to revive 2d3 the turn you cast it, that's very strong. And it's only 60 points, so it's pretty easy to fit that into lists. Sometimes you'll have like 50 to 60 points left over, and you think, oh, well, maybe I'll squeeze this unit down. I'll downgrade these Hexwraiths into a Chainrasp unit, and then I could pick up the Emerald Swarm for the last remaining points. So I think Emerald Life Swarm will see some use.
Yeah, I think this will see more play than Cogs initially, because Cogs sort of tunes in the make Nighthaunt have reliable charges, even out of Deep Strike, or just moving up the board. Emerald Life Swarm fits very well into the Nighthaunt is a sort of mid-board, mid-range army that wants to grind its opponents out, and each ghost you return, as we mentioned, because of how the Scorpit works, is a huge increase in effective health for Nighthaunt. So I think even though this is the way we rank them, I think Emerald Life Swarm will see a lot more play than Cogs will.
Yeah, I think the cogs are more impactful for what they're doing, and they make a list work, whereas the Life Swarm is more general, and there's times where it's not going to get a lot of value, right? Another use of the cogs is to give a wizard a +1 spell. So you could, for example, auto cast the cogs with one of your heroes, and then use another hero to gain an additional spell
For metamorphosis.
For metamorphosis, or in addition to like an arcane bolt, sometimes that extra arcane bolt might be what you need in order to win the game. Little bits of utility here and there, I think, put cogs over the edge for me. And when you're auto-casting, I think the last one worth considering, the Geminids have been one of my favorite spells since 2nd edition when they were unleashed. They are very, very strong, and my immediate thought was, auto-casting Geminids, great, can't wait to do that. But Geminids aren't actually that good in a Night Hunt army, because really all you're turning off, since you're not shooting, you're not turning off defensive, all-out defense in the shooting phase, all you're doing is taking down, redeploy, and unleash hell. And there's a lot of other ways to do that. With the Tomb Banshee, you can also mess with command points with Kurdoss and Olynder and things like that. So, yeah, kind of not great in this army.
No, not that great.
Yeah. So, let's start the summary portion of our review. Here's some tips from us that you can take home with you. Night Hunt are a relatively low damage army. You're not going to win the game through a big explosive combat phase like Iron Jaws or Ideneth. You have to grind your opponent down through sustained combat. So there are ways to boost your damage. You can get bonuses to hit and wound. You can get some Wave of Terror stacking going on. You can use the Light Shard. But in general, none of that is reliable enough to have an entire strategy based around it. Because like sometimes you'll make 3 charges and all of them will stack up Wave of Terror. Other times you'll fail 2 charges and just make it with 1. And other times you just won't get the 8-up charges that you need. So because Wave of Terror is so random, you kind of have to try to multi-charge at the same time to try to reduce the variance. Like if you just have one big unit of 30 and you send it off on its own, it's not reliably going to get the extra Rend that you need to do anything. Because Rend 1 attacks with 1 damage are not very useful, especially only 2 attacks per model like most of these guys are. You need to remember that you are not going to succeed every charge roll, and you need to have a backup plan. That's very difficult to do in an army that is all melee all the time, because frankly, I think none of the shooting units or ranged units are worth using. So you have to plan ahead and think, okay, well, if you're going all in, you better be damn sure it's going to win you the game, and you better be sure it's not going to lose you the game if you fail. So have a backup plan. When you're using units with big footprints, like 30 models, James, I know you've seen this firsthand with units of 15 Judicators. They have a very large footprint, and getting everything in range can be difficult, and it leaves a lot of vulnerable flanks for your opponent to exploit.
Yeah, not to mention Night Hunt have a serious problem outside Grimghast Reapers to fight in 2 ranks, so you have to be cognizant of that.
For sure. Yeah, 1H range is not great on 30 models. I think Night Hunt looks really well poised to deal with melee armies that are charging into them, but against shooting armies, Night Hunt really, the typical Night Hunt build that doesn't specifically try to tech in some answers for shooting is going to really struggle because a lot of their effects just don't activate unless they're in melee. Wave of Terror only works against combat with the Strike Last, the -1 hit. The Cruciator requires having a terrified unit within 12 inches, so that means he needs to be pushed up forward, the units he's supporting to be pushed up forward, and you need to finish a charge in order to get in there. And yeah, it's pretty rough. Night Hunt aren't fast enough, 8 inches across the board makes them die a lot in the midfield. Shooting is going to be a problem for Night Hunt armies. And speaking of shooting, you definitely want to bring a unit of Spirit Hosts. I think every Night Hunt list, you're going to start with a unit of Spirit Hosts. If you have any amount of these heroes that you want to live more than 1 turn, you definitely want to protect them all with Spirit Hosts. It's cheaper to bring a unit of Spirit Hosts than it is to bring a second hero. And I think the last general tip here is to save command points for Inspiring Presence, because one thing we haven't talked about in this book is that you are not immune to Battle Shock. There is no Battle Shock immunity in the book aside from Inspiring Presence. So if you get hit by an ability, or if you just get hit by a lot of damage, make sure you have a command point saved up so that when you lose 15 ghosts, the other 15 don't just run away. Night Hunt are durable. We've been talking about that the whole time. If you have 30 ghosts with a 4-up ethereal, that's effectively 60 wounds. And if you have a 5-up board on top of that, that's effectively 90 wounds that need to be killed. But that doesn't make you unkillable. If you have specific focus fire, if your opponent is able to shut off your 5-up ward, If your opponent is able to deal damage outside of things that you can activate the 5+ ward, like spells or abilities that don't target, charge mortal wounds are a big problem for this army. So don't think you're invulnerable. Just because you've got one of the most defensive armies in the game doesn't mean you can't lose anything.
Mm-hmm.
And you can really stack defensives heavy in this army. With Shade Mist and with the Wave of Terror on almost any charge roll, you're looking at -1/-1 on opponent units. You put in Krulghast Cruciator, and that's also -1 damage. And yeah, it's just really hard to shift these units. And then you start reviving models. The first few games people play against Nighthaunt are going to, until you figure out the ins and outs of how this army works and what you should be focusing, it's going to feel awful to deal almost no damage to their ghosts, and the few models you kill, they're just going to revive back up with the Spirit Torment and the Guardian Revive and Olynder and Rally and Unworld Life Swarm, and it's just going to feel really bad. But that makes it fun for the Nighthaunt player, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at some list building advice. Broadly speaking, you can categorize the units, I think, into either hammers, offensive support, or defensive support. And your hammer units, these are your main damage dealers. So you kind of build your list around what these units are trying to do. You can go with Grimghast Reapers. You can get a lot of them in a single unit because they're 2-inch range. You could go with Bladegheist Revenants and Scarlet Doom, doing a bunch of mortal wounds on the charge. You could also go with Dreadscythe Harridans in a Quicksilver Dead list. Or you could bring a bunch of black coaches and try to make them work. But the point is, these are the units that are trying to kill your opponent. And you have to kill your opponent in Age of Sigmar. You can't just let them sit on objectives the whole game. One of the cool things about Nighthaunt is that their hammer units play double duty also as an anvil. So not only are they really, really like your punchy units, they're also really durable, which is really interesting. Not a lot of armies have that. I think Fire Slayers can kind of do that with their Hearthguard Berserkers, but I think Nighthaunt just do it better. The only good hero hammer unit, I think, is Kurdoss, because he starts off at Rend 3 damage, so charging him into combat just to get an extra Wave of Terror, stealing combat or command points from your opponent the whole time. I think that's cool, but he's definitely not an anvil. He's not going to be able to survive a lot of damage. Looking at offensive support, these units help your hammers. So these are units like Glaivewraith Stalkers, Hexwraiths, the Craventhrone Guard, Chainghasts. These units are meant to assist your hammer units in dealing the damage, either through direct increases to their damage output, like Chainghasts give you +1 hit, Hexwraiths do charge mortal wounds. Sometimes you just want another unit charging in order for extra rolls on the Wave of Terror table.
Mm-hmm.
Other units to consider in that category would be something like the Tomb Banshee, because she can shut off Inspiring Presence, she can shut off all-out defense. The Guardian of Souls is going to give you +1 to wound rolls. The Spirit Torment with the Chainghasts gives you +1 hit. Olynder can revive a bunch of models and keep you fighting. Dreadblade Harrow can duplicate the Discorporate to make sure that when you take the counterattack, you're not dying. It can also give you all-out attack on multiple units. There's a lot of interesting utility that these heroes bring. And then for defensive support, you've got units that help you with defensive bonuses or screening. So these are things like the Spirit Host, protecting all of your heroes. The Myrnmourn Banshees are trying to unbind enemy spells that are casted on you. And the Chainrasps are just cheap disposable screens you can put in front to absorb melee combat. I'd also put some heroes in here like the Krulghast Cruciator. He's strictly a defensive hero. He doesn't do anything offensively. Spirit Torment revives you. Guardian of Souls revives you and has really good spells. Olynder revives. Dreadblade Harrow gives you double Discorporates and all that good stuff. So when you're trying to form a list, make sure you have some of each of these. Like if you run a list with just hammers and defensive support, you're going to find that you don't have enough reliable Wave of Terror stacking. You don't have the mobility needed in order to play tactically. If you don't have any hammers, you're just not going to do any damage. And if you don't have any defensive support, your army's going to crumble. So you need a good mix. If I had to put some numbers on it off the top of my head, maybe like your army should be maybe 50% hammers, 25% offensive, 25% defensive. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Just really broadly speaking, not anything specific.
I mean, the thing is, the Discorporate makes it so like a lot of your units can like change roles pretty easily. Like, you're an army that's gonna rely a lot on your support heroes and then making those buffs work, which is typical death play style, which is how it goes.
Yeah, and unlike other death armies, these guys are really good at keeping their heroes alive with those Spirit Hosts.
Nighthaunt lists, I would always start with one unit of Spirit Hosts. It's battle line, so it's like not even you don't even need to have a battle line tax for it. And since you can protect a suite of heroes that you really need for your offensive and defensive boosts, especially against things like Kairos Fate Weaver, Seraphon, Stormcast shooting, always include at least one unit of Spirit Host. They're also incredibly cheap. Chainrasps are cheapest battle line. You can shave points, but I don't think Chainrasps are necessary. I would say include them if it's a meta dependent call. If Alpha Strike melees and you really want some screens because you don't want your precious hammer units to get hurt, sure, go for some Chainrasps. Or if you want to have a cheap unit to cycle Wave of Terror with. Tomb Banshees are obviously Tomb Banshee can be a very powerful pick against command points. What makes me iffy about her is the 4-up roll, but if you're a Nighthaunt, you're building hero heavy anyway, so consider her for a 5th or 6th slot.
Yep, and don't forget, you do get +1 to that roll if an enemy is terrified. So it is a 3-up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, once you're engaged, post turn 2, it's more than likely going to be a 3-up. But it is a bit of a nombo because it means if they're terrified, it's a 3-up, which means if you're retreating and charging because you're trying to cycle Wave of Terror, it's going to be a 4-up most of the time.
No, because it happens at the end of the charge phase.
Then perfect. Yeah, then that makes it incredibly powerful.
And defensively, it's great too because if you're getting charged, they're terrified.
Mm-hmm. After that, I would say hero units, that are damage dealers, just like Stormcast, they're not worth it. You might as well be bringing a unit that does actual damage. Double reinforced units are great. They're good and bad because a lot of Nighthaunt units only have 1 inch of reach. So, it's bad for Wave of Terror because you want to stack those as much as possible. But then again, on a unit like Bladegheist, where you want to pile on as many mortal wounds as possible, you have to consider the pros and cons of reinforcing a unit. So it takes a lot of play testing and thinking about what you're going to build. From that, we go into our main archetypes. A defensive castles with something like a big block of 30. This could be Grimghast Reapers. This could be Bladegheist Revenants. And then multiple units of 10 for cycling Wave of Terror. These could be other Bladegheist Revenants, Grimghast Reapers, or even just Chainrasps. And then obviously the 20-20-20 split, and then your 4 to 5 support heroes. Nighthaunt has a wide variety of playstyles. They can be aggressive, damage-based. They can be control-based. I mean, they are at their core an attrition army, but within there are some slight variations as to how they play. Grieving Legion and Grimghast is a great control build, whereas the Bladegheist Revenants and Scarlet Doom are primarily a damage-focused build. Dreadblade Harrow, Krulghast, Guardian of Souls, and Spirit Torment, I think, are the 4 heroes that you will find in almost any Nighthaunt list. I think this is what their core suite is. Now, Olynder could replace one of these, or could even be in addition to one of these. But you do have to remember, Nighthaunt players do have to remember that taking more heroes means they're taking less units. And eventually there comes a spot where you're like, well, I don't have that many units, but I have all the buffs in the world. So your buffs aren't really doing that much. Nighthaunt units also really, really want to be in Hunters of the Heartland, simply because Discorporate is an amazing ability to have. It's basically your all-out defense. And much like Annihilators and Stormcast, once you start going Battle Regimen, you're not really built for that kind of Battle Regimen playstyle. The other main archetype of this army is the Alpha Tarpit. We mentioned Awlrach, who has a command ability to teleport a Nighthaunt unit, and Nighthaunt units can also put up to 3 units into reserve. The Dreadblade Harrow also teleports, plus Nighthaunt have a Spectral Tether spell in their lore to help them teleport. Meaning, if you play this right, you can have a large combination of lots of wounds on your Discorporate saves right in front of your opponent's army, essentially pitting them in their deployment zone. The downside to this build is that it often requires you to be Battle Regiment, which means you're not going to have your full cast of support heroes, and you're going to be pretty vulnerable to things like Roar and Monstrous Rampages, essentially. Auto-casting Cogs with the Midnight Tome to have a charge bonus, so you can essentially make 8 on the dice to complete charges out of reserve is phenomenal here. And then obviously you have your mortal wound sources in this army, which are Olynder, Hexwraiths, Emerald Host, the Subfaction, Black Coaches, and your Terminexus spell, which can be autocast using the Midnight Tome. Nagash also is a great source of mortal wounds in this army, because if nothing else, you can just unload 8 arcane bolts into the opponent. But given that he doesn't benefit from any of the buffs, considering they target the Nighthaunt keyword, he's a bit of a tough pick. But the Nighthaunt lore is spectacular, so Nagash might also be somewhat viable build, maybe like a fun, maybe B tier build. But you certainly want to start off with your first 4, which is, as we mentioned, the Harrow, the Krulghast, Guardian Souls, and Spirit Torment for more consistency.
Yeah. These are the 4 main archetypes we found when we were looking at the book. I'm hoping other things could come up as well. I think the book is diverse enough that these aren't necessarily the only way to play the army. The Nagash build in particular didn't really come together. I tried to brainstorm how it would look, and something like a bunch of Hexwraiths and maybe a black coach, but like he's so expensive. You're really playing 1,000 points and of Nighthaunt, which this is the kind of army that you need a lot of it. The support heroes are so useful for the units. They work in tandem, and any points not spent on that package just makes it worse. It's really designed around 2,000 point games. So let's take a look at a couple sample lists here. The first one is I called Castle Grimghast. It's a Grieving Legion list with 10 drops. You can see the stats here are compared to Stormcast. The wounds are about the same. The models are way higher. 74 models, 103 wounds. Now those are good quality wounds, right? Everything's a 4-up ethereal. Everything will probably have a 5-up ward when it gets attacked. So those wounds go a long way. You can see your standard suite of heroes. You've got the Tomb Banshee, the Krulghast Cruciator, the Dreadblade Harrow, the Spirit Torment, and the Guardian of Souls. This is a 5-hero package, and it's been split into Warlord Battalion, Hunters of the Heartland for the hammer units, and then a cheeky little Vanguard Battalion because you have the extra heroes, and so you can stick some Spirit Hosts in there and give them once per game. You can run 6 with them and save a command point. Because one of the things I think Spirit Hosts will struggle to do is keep up with the teleporting heroes, so that sometimes that extra 6 inches is what you need. So pretty standard list. It's got 2x30 Grimghast Reapers as your offensive hammers. For supporting units, it's got some Chainghasts to give them +1 hit, and it's got 4 Glaivewraith Stalkers as a supporting unit. Now this is a very greedy build because I love having the most amount of value from buffs, and having 2 units of Grimghast Reapers both get Discorporate defensively when you use the Dreadblade Harrow's ability. They both can be in range of the Guardian of Souls with a +1 to wound. They can both be revived with the Ruler of the Spectral Hosts. They can both be in range of the Dreadblade Harrow because he can just teleport in range for the Light Shard. I'm a very greedy player. I want to squeeze out all the value. I think realistically, this would work a lot better if you cut one of the 30 blocks into 10, 10, 10. So it would be 30 and then 10, 3 squads of 10. I think that would work better. But as a starting point, I think this is where I would go.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think 10, 10, 10, and 30 would be the better way to go, simply because it gives you more board positioning. Maybe late game, as you start to lose units, it starts to give you more Wave of Terror options too.
Yeah. Now I would have loved to squeeze in some additional disposable Spirit Hosts or Chainrasps or something, because I think one thing this list is going to struggle with is that your opponent is going to charge something that you put a lot of value in. And if you're getting Alpha Struck, if your opponent goes Battle Regiment and hits you first, you could lose those 30 Grimghast Reapers before you get up your Shade Mist and your Seal of Shyish, which I didn't include in this list. I probably should have. I think it should be on the Guardian of Souls, the seal. But the point is, you could just lose before that happens. So I guess that's where Ruler of the Spectral Host comes in. On a 4-up, you revive half the unit, and your opponent's dedicated all these resources and put themselves in your face. That's great for you, and then you can just counterattack and kill them. Well, not really kill them, but you know what I mean. Grind them out over 3 turns like Nighthaunt do.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of grand strategy, I think Nighthaunt are always going to pick Hold the Line. It's just there's so many battle line units, and they're so durable, and you can always just teleport one into a corner or something in order to score that. Yeah, easy to do. The Triumph I picked here was inspired because I felt like I wouldn't always be in range for the +1 to wound aura. I feel like sometimes I'll pile out of range, especially with Grimghast. They want to go in deep, so I felt the +1 to wound sometimes might come in handy. And the extra enhancement I took this time was an artifact. I did not take any endless spells with this build. You'll notice I don't have the Midnight Tome in here. So I think that's a pretty typical setup for Nighthaunt, kind of a take all comers defensive setup. The next one here, Morgonku, if you want to run us through, because I think this one's your baby.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, this is the pin your opponent in their deployment zone. This obviously has to be Battle Regiment because you can't really allow your opponent turn 1 and the opportunity to get out of their deployment zone. But so essentially, the crux of this list revolves around Awlrach, The Krulghast Cruciator for that -1 damage, which is so useful. And the Guardian of Souls, because Guardian of Souls, I think, is just like probably the staple Nighthaunt hero you'll find in every list. And you can take the Midnight Tome for Shade Mist. I would probably put Cogs in here if I could, but essentially the list revolves. Oh yeah. So you would autocast Cogs using the Midnight Tome, and then essentially use Awlrach, the 3 units up to that you get into reserve, as well as the Black Coach's auto teleport, to essentially put the 50 Grimghast Reapers, Krulghast, and the Guardian of Souls right in front of your opponent's army, just creating a wall of ghosts alongside the Black Coach, maybe in the middle, maybe on the flanks. And the idea is to then charge into your opponent, try to make those 8s. It is 1975 points, so the triumph you would pick here is Bloodthirsty, which also lets you reroll charges. And once you do that, the idea is to essentially not let them escape. Any models that die, if you do complete a charge and kill some models, hopefully the 5 models then power the Black Coach, which means it can be ready for a 3d3 Mortal Wound Unleash the next turn.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much just pin your opponent and don't let them score while the rest of your units do. So
the key here, and why you want to use Awlrach instead of just another hero, is because the Guardian of Souls wants to automatically cast the Chronomantic Cogs, and then you want to teleport him forwards so that you can benefit from his +1 to wound aura. And when you only have 3 slots in a battle regiment for heroes, you got to be very picky, and you got to be willing to spend the extra resources in order to move them around appropriately for this strategy. And Grieving Legion really comes in handy here, because if you just pin your opponent in their territory and then they can't retreat, that's it. It's a binary game. Either they bust their way out of the castle, which good luck against 30 Grimghast Reapers with all the defensive buffs, and it's not easy to do. And it can be the move that just wins you the game. I don't know if that's like a 5-0 tournament strategy, but I think it can catch a lot of players off guard.
It'll certainly be annoying for a lot of players.
Next up, I called this the Red Scare. This is a Scarlet Doom list. It's very similar to the first list, with Grimghast Reapers replaced by Bladegheist Revenants. Now, they do cost a bit more points, so you'll notice there's just less stuff in this list. But the damage that 30 Bladegeists do on the charge, 2 units of 30 charging, is about 20 mortal wounds by itself. So this one, I opted for the Chronomantic Cogs to make sure that those charges go off, but otherwise it's the same kind of package, right? Guardian of Souls with Master of Magic, and Spectral Tether, so he can just teleport himself around reliably. He can reliably revive D6 models with his spell, and he can also try to unbind enemy spells. The Tomb Banshees here to disable all-out defense, because you have less units than in other lists. This is effectively a +1 rend effective. You can disable that. The Cruciator here is just a fantastic model, because you're still a grindy army. You can't get around that. And the Dreadblade Harrow teleporting into range with the Light Shard of the Harvest Moon can really turn up the damage on these Bladegheist Revenants. They can go up to 4 attacks apiece, and if you get 1 or 2 Wave of Terror, that's Rend 2, Rend 3, disabling all out defense and doing all the charge mortal wounds. Fantastic. Just a fantastic combo. I opted for the Spirit Torment to take an Arcane Tome with Shade Mist, and I think Shade Mist is very good. I think I might consider swapping the Guardian of Souls Tether for Seal of Shyish, but yeah, otherwise it's pretty much like that first list, same kind of play style, but with an offensive twist. Instead of shutting down enemy charge or enemy retreats, you are just doing a ton of mortal wounds on the charge.
Yeah, this list is gonna kill a lot of armies out there.
It's gonna do more damage than anyone expects Nighthaunt to do.
Yep.
I think people are gonna start with Emerald Blast and Grieving Legion, and they're going to get used to how much damage Nighthaunt can do. And then they're going to pivot to Scarlet Doom and realize, oh, hold on, this army actually does damage too. This last one here is kind of like a experiment I was working on to try to get the most out of the Emerald host ability. And it's 7 drops. It's a Warlord and Hunters battalion. It's quite a lot less models and wounds than we've seen in the other lists so far. But it's split between the Guardian of Souls. He's got the Midnight Tome. He's probably going to be auto-casting the Mortalis Terminexus. There's a Dreadblade Harrow, who has an Arcane Tome, so he can do some sneaky teleporting and casting. He's got Shade Mist, because you want to still have, I think Nighthaunt always want a big block of 30, so that they can stack a bunch of defensive buffs and try to survive through an enemy charge. And then it's got Lady Olynder, who has Spectral Tether to teleport herself around so that she can be in range of her Mortal Wound Blast. Then it's got a couple units of Hexwraiths to do the mortal wounds on the charge, a Black Coach, Interestingly, the Black Coach might get empowered in the hero phase, and then it can shoot off immediately in the shooting phase. So if you're playing against a very aggressive melee army, I think the Black Coach is going to do a lot of work. But the idea here is you just try to do as many mortal wounds as possible between the Emerald Host's ability, between the Mortalis Terminexus doing D3 mortal wounds to everything, with Lady Olynder doing D6 mortal wounds to something, the Hexwraiths doing D3 each time they charge, and then the Black Coach trying to do 3D3 as well. And in a pinch, you can always have the Dreadblade Harrow and Lady Olynder cast the other endless spells that are in the list. You'll see them at the bottom. You've got the Shyish Reaper and the Aether Void Pendulum, and you can cast all three of those in a single turn if you want to. So I think you don't have to lean this heavy into the Emerald Host ability. This was kind of just a thought experiment, seeing how far I could take it. I think if I were to try the Emerald Host in a more competitive list, I'd probably cut the Black Coach and just add in more support heroes and more units. I think the Black Coach it's really hard to get your points worth.
That's fair. I can see a lot of lists dropping the Black Coach.
If Nighthaunt had better shooting, like if the Craventhrone Guard were good, Black Coach would be fantastic. So, summary. Nighthaunt Battletome Review. Taking a look at the S tier units, we put Grimghast Reapers, Bladegheist Revenants, the Krulghast Cruciator, and the Guardian of Souls. In A tier, we've got the Spirit Torment, the Tomb Banshee, the Dreadblade Harrow, Olynder, Awlrach, and the Terminexus. You'll notice it's just heroes in there, and a spell. B tier, we've got the Hexwraiths, the Dreadscythe Harridans, the Spirit Host, Black Coach, and Chainghasts. And for heroes, we've got Nagash, and Kurdoss, and for spells, we've got the Reaper. And the C tier, sometimes coming in handy, we've got the Chainrasps and Glaivewraith Stalkers, along with the Vault of Souls. In D tier, very situationally useful, probably not worth using, we've got Craventhrone Guard, Myrnmourn Banshees, Thorns of the Briar Queen, which I'm going to remind everyone costs 280 points, the Lord Executioner, and Reikenor. And in the F tier, we feel like these units are not worth using. The Knight of Shrouds, the Knight of Shrouds on Steed, the Cairn Wraith, and the Scriptor Mortis. In summary, that puts viable, air quotes here, viable units, whatever you want that to mean. For us, it's C tier or higher, 21 out of 30, which is 70% of the book. And viable subfactions, again, 4 out of 4. I think all 4 can see play. Quicksilver Dead is kind of on the border of not really that good, but I think in the right meta, it could see play.
If volume of attacks, I guess, becomes popular, but we might see like multiple, Harridan gameplay or something.
Yeah, there's always a chance. They're not irredeemable. They have some nice things going for them. So looking at Nighthaunt strengths, everything, asterisk, is a 4-up save that ignores Rend, because I think Chainrasps are only a 5-up, unfortunately. The Nighthaunt as an army are agile. They're not fast, but everything's flying, everything can retreat and charge. You got a lot of teleport effects, so even though you might not move up the board as fast as a Slaanesh army or even a Daughters of Cain army, you're slippery. You're able to maneuver and get to where you need to be, and you have a lot of movement tricks. Wave of Terror is a very powerful ability. When you have multiple -1 save effects, you just crush people in combat. It's very powerful. And removing units after deployment with your reserve deep strike ability and then setting them up after that is just very strong, because your opponent doesn't know which units you're leaving in reserve as they're deploying their units. So you just get more information and you can do some tricky stuff. Double reinforced units that can play both hammer and anvil. I would love it if Stormcast had stuff like this. I think the closest we get is with Stormdrake Guard, but even they can just be killed off, especially with the focused fire that people are bringing these days. I don't think it's going to be as easy to kill the Nighthaunt, especially with them reviving so many models every turn.
Yeah. I mean, Nighthaunt, I think you have to get prepared for a long game, regardless of what build you're breaking.
Yeah, for sure. Bravery 10 also makes them good at healing chip damage, which I think is always a threat. There's always little bits of damage coming in from mortal wounds through different armies. So Bravery 10 helps them with heroic recovery. Now, in terms of weaknesses, which isn't something we've really talked about in this review, we tried to focus on all the strengths, but Nighthaunt definitely have a lot of weaknesses. Across the board, they have low rend. I think Kurdoss is the only really good high rended target in the game, but all the hammer units need Wave of Terror. And unfortunately, Wave of Terror is random and unreliable. So you need a lot of units. You need things to go your way in order to make the best use out of Wave of Terror. When you're fighting defensively, you just won't have Wave of Terror, right? You have to consider that as well.
Yeah, you need those 8s, basically. It's,
Yep.
Yeah.
I would also call them a slow army. 8 inches is not great. There's no access to run or charge, and outside of auto-casting cogs and the Glaivewraith Stalkers, there are no charge bonuses in this army. So kind of the whole army moves up together as a single brick 8 inches up the board per turn, and that's not fast. That is not a fast army at all. Very predictable in terms, like, unless they're using their teleporting tricks and retreating and charging, they're slowly just drifting forwards, and that can be taken advantage of. You want MSU style units so that you can get more charges with Wave of Terror, but you can only reroll 1 charge from a command ability per turn. So there's no way to get multiple rerolls, further making Wave of Terror a random thing, which is unfortunate. I think the army is very reliant on very fragile support heroes. Spirit hosts help, but they cost points. They have positioning requirements. They have opportunity costs. If you're teleporting your hero, they're going to be out of range of your spirit host. If you're charging your hero into combat, the spirit host may not make the charge as well. If you're splitting your army up, they can't cover multiple heroes at the same time, so they're not free. They're a very good tool, but they're not a free tool in terms of opportunity costs and points. You can charge and pile in over screens, but keeping coherency with 30 models in a unit makes this tactic very difficult. Whereas an army like Idoneth Deepkin, they can just charge their shark with a whatever size 90 mil base, I think, just jump over a screen on the other side. Doing that with 30 models and keeping coherency is a lot more difficult. So you end up fighting screens a lot because you have poor range power projection, which, that's a fancy term for shooting in long-range magic. You mostly just end up fighting screens with this army, and then your opponent counterattacks, and when you're fighting defensively, you don't have your Wave of Terror active. Many units that want to be double reinforced, like Bladegheist Revenants, Dreadscythe Harridans, they are on 32 mil bases with 1 inch reach. That is a huge downside to how this army wants to fight, especially when you have no shooting and you're relying on fighting. I think the important units, like your big blocks of 30 models, your big hammer and anvil all in one, they will still die to focused fire, especially if you don't have the 5+ ward active, either because you were hit by Geminids and you can't activate it, or you were hit by a roar, or if your Seal of Shyish was unbound, or if they're just hitting you with a spell or with charge mortal wounds. Anytime you're taking damage without the 5+ ward, you're quite vulnerable. Well, not quite vulnerable. You're not like paper thin like a Daughters of Cain army, but it's risky.
Yeah.
And on that note, Nighthaunt have really poor defense against magic. I think they wrote the Myrnmourn Banshees, and they're not a great defense. Anti-horde spells will tear you up, and there's not much you can do about it besides hoping that you get a good unbinding roll with Master of Magic. The Krulghast Cruciator is a fantastic model right now, but if they continue to release armies that rely on damage 1 attacks, he does nothing. Like literally nothing. And if you have high volume damage 1 armies like Cities of Sigmar or Stormcast pivot to Crossbow Adjudicators, or just you're fighting against 60 witches that don't have Mind Razor and are just tons and tons of damage 1 attacks, that's really bad for Nighthaunt. And I think the last really big weakness this army is going to have is that it is very hungry for command points. You're going to be using Inspiring Presence, Discorporate, Rally, All-Out Attack. You're going to be using just command points all the time. I think you're going to be using Heroic Leadership almost every single turn, and that's definitely a weakness for this army. Overall, I think, though, it's not going to have trouble going 4-1 at tournaments, at GTs. I think it's definitely a 4-1 kind of book. If you get good matchups, if you're a good player, I definitely think you can go 5-0 with this book. So I think
people are going 5-0 with the current book. I mean, I can't imagine all these buffs and not going 5-0.
It's buffs in a lot of ways, but you have less stuff. You have a lot less stuff on the table than you used to have.
Yeah, but so does everyone else.
That's true. Yeah, everything's getting more expensive. But yeah, I think, my opinion, I think Nighthaunt are an A-tier army. I would put them on the same tier as like Idoneth and Stormcast. I think they're a strong army. They have very defined weaknesses, but very defined strengths as well, and I think that's very good for the game.
Yeah, agree.
What do you think, James? Because you were very interested in starting this army.
I'm still pretty interested at this point. Like I said at the beginning, I think there's a lot of fun tricks here, and I can find this playstyle really engaging.
What are you leaning towards at first?
Probably something close to Mergonxless, quite frankly. Just sort of Alpha Tar Pit style.
Oh, it's going to be frustrating for people to play against, but
I like frustrating people.
that's why we play Stormcast, right?
Yeah. That's why I save stack Drakes and then force them up the board.
Okay. Mergonk, any closing thoughts on the army?
I guess we'll release a how to counter. We'll talk more about this when we release a how to counter everything Nighthaunt edition. But guys, because of how insanely tough they are, crossbow adjudicators are going to go up in value. Volume of attacks is going to go up in value. And with the GHB coming up, that is going to promote the use of more troops and hopefully like troops in numbers. This book is actually positioned to do extremely well in the meta. This is not an army you can just alpha strike off the board with Thunderbolt Volley and expect to win just off of that. So just be careful.
Said crossbow adjudicators will make my pot fold like paper.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Discorporate really helps, and it's a pretty phenomenal ability that they've given them.
Yep. Well, we can talk all about it in our eventual upcoming how to counter Nighthaunt. But I think I've had my fill for a little while. I'm going to go get some games in before we make another video about these guys.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Leave us a thing, the YouTubes with the comments and the likes and all that. So let us know what you think. And if you guys like these, let us know. We'll try to do more reviews for more army books that are coming out.
See you guys.
See you in the next one. All right, so this could be a long one. I don't think it's going to be like 4 hours long like Stormcast was, but I think we're going to be here pretty late.